My wife's boss sent me a text with my wife's phone at 1 a.m. She's occupied now. She'll call later. I responded, no need. You can have her. We're done. 10 minutes later, my wife and her boss were at my door, clearly in distress, begging. Look, I'm not saying I have a sixth sense or anything, but when your phone buzzes at 1:03 in the morning with that specific angry wasp vibration that screams, your life is about to get complicated, you just know something's gone sideways. I was half asleep, drooling on a pillow that smelled vaguely like old Chinese takeout and broken dreams, when my phone lit up like a disco ball at a funeral. The blue light cut through my bedroom darkness with all the subtlety of a freight train crashing through a library. I grabbed the phone with the coordination of a drunk giraffe, squinting at the screen like it might suddenly make sense if I just focused hard enough. The notification said it was from Rachel, my wife, Rachel, the woman who promised to love me through sickness and health, and apparently also through really terrible life choices. But here's the kicker that made my stomach drop faster than a lead balloon. The actual sender name displayed was G. Price, work. Her boss, Dr. Gavin Price, the kind of guy who probably practiced his sympathetic doctor face in the mirror every morning while flossing with organic, gluten-free dental tape. The message itself was short, sweet, and about as comforting as a cactus hug. She's occupied now. She'll call later. I stared at those words. Then I stared some more. I read them backwards, forwards, in pig Latin, trying to find some alternate interpretation where occupied meant something innocent like busy saving lives or stuck in a really long staff meeting about proper hand-washing techniques. But my brain, that traitorous bastard, kept circling back to the only conclusion that made sense at 1:03 in the freaking morning. My wife was with her boss, and he felt comfortable enough using her phone to text me like I was some annoying telemarketer he could brush off with a canned response. The rage hit me like a tidal wave made of pure, crystallized what the actual hell. But I'm a locksmith by trade, former cop by history, and a dramatic son of a gun by nature, so I channeled all that fury into crafting the perfect response. My thumbs flew across the keyboard with the precision of a surgeon and the pettiness of a reality TV villain. I typed, no need. You can have her. We're done. Then I added a period at the end because nothing says, I'm dead serious and you just nuke your own life, quite like proper punctuation. Grammar is the ultimate power move when you're ending a marriage via text at 1 in the morning. I hit send with the same satisfaction I imagine people feel when they drop the mic after a killer speech. Then I set my phone face down on the nightstand, rolled over, and tried to convince myself I could actually fall back asleep after essentially detonating a nuclear bomb in the middle of my marriage. Spoiler alert, I could not. My brain was doing the mental equivalent of running laps while screaming and occasionally stopping to replay every moment of the last few months, looking for signs I'd missed, red flags I'd ignored, and excuses I'd swallowed like bad medicine. 10 minutes passed. 10 minutes that felt like 10 years, during which I alternated between righteous indignation and the kind of soul-crushing sadness that makes you want to ugly cry into your pillow while eating ice cream straight from the container. I was right in the middle of composing a mental list titled Things I Should Have Noticed, You Idiot, when I heard it. The frantic pounding on my front door that sounded like someone was trying to beat their way through solid wood using nothing but pure panic and poor decision-making skills. Then came the voices. Oh, the voices. Rachel's voice, pitched high with that particular frequency of distress that women use when they realize they've been caught red-handed and need to engage emergency damage control protocols. And underneath hers, a deeper male voice that had to belong to Dr. Gavin. I text other men's wives from their phones, Price himself. They were both talking over each other, a cacophony of pleading and explaining, and what sounded suspiciously like the verbal equivalent of throwing spaghetti at a wall to see what sticks. I hauled myself out of bed with all the enthusiasm of a man walking to his own execution, threw on the same jeans I discarded on the floor 6 hours earlier, and shuffled to the front door like a zombie who'd just been denied his morning coffee. Through the peephole, I got my first good look at the disaster unfolding on my doorstep, and let me tell you, it was better than any reality TV show I'd ever hate-watched. Rachel was still in her scrubs, those blue hospital pajamas that apparently double as I'm having an affair camouflage, and her mascara was running down her face in thick black rivers that made her look like a raccoon who'd just been through a particularly emotional therapy session. Her hair was a mess, that specific kind of mess that happens when you've been horizontal for reasons that have nothing to do with sleeping, and she was clutching her phone like it was a life preserver, and she was drowning in an ocean of her own stupid choices. Next to her stood Dr. Gavin Price himself, and oh boy, he was exactly what I'd pictured. Bleary-eyed, wearing one of those white coats that doctors use to broadcast their authority and superiority to us mere mortals who can't tell a spleen from a pancreas. He had that look on his face, the one that screams, I make important life or death decisions every day and also terrible personal decisions after hours. His hair was rumpled, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had the general appearance of a man who'd just realized he'd walked face first into a trap of his own making. They both looked frantic, like actors who'd forgotten their lines mid-performance and were desperately improvising their way through the worst play ever written. Rachel was saying something about, it's not what you think, and please just let me explain, while Gavin was attempting to back her up with phrases like medical emergency and complete misunderstanding that landed with all the credibility of a $3 bill. I reached for the deadbolt with deliberate slowness, drawing out the moment like a conductor preparing for the dramatic finale of a symphony. Click. I turned it exactly half an inch. Not enough to open, just enough to let them hear it. Then, because I'm nothing if not committed to the bit, I did the whole chain lock flourish with the kind of theatrical flair that would make a Broadway actor proud. The metal chain slid into place with a satisfying clink that said, oh, you're not getting in here, and I'm going to enjoy every second of making you squirm. I let them beg through that chain. I stood there in my rumpled jeans and t-shirt that said, I lock it like it's hot, a gift from Frank that I thought was hilarious right up until this moment. Listening to them spew excuses and explanations through the 4-inch gap that might as well have been the Grand Canyon. Rachel was crying. Real tears, not the manipulative kind, which somehow made it worse. Gavin was doing his best impression of a reasonable human being, which was about as convincing as a snake trying to sell you life insurance. I narrated the whole scene in my head with enough sarcasm to power a small city, because if I didn't laugh at the absurdity of my wife and her boss showing up at my door at 1:15 in the morning looking like they'd just fled the scene of a crime, I was definitely going to cry. And I'd be damned if I was going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. So I stood there, arms crossed, watching them perform their desperate duet of denial through my chain-locked door, and I thought, this is it. This is rock bottom. A locksmith who can't even keep his own marriage locked down, getting a front-row seat to the worst show on earth, performed by the two people who were supposed to be on his side. Irony, I decided, really is a locksmith's middle name. Morning arrived with all the grace and subtlety of a hangover wearing steel-toed boots, kicking me directly in the cerebral cortex. I woke up on my couch, because apparently I'd passed out there after the midnight doorstep drama festival, with a crick in my neck that felt like someone had replaced my spine with a rusty pipe, and the kind of headache that makes you question every life choice that led to this exact moment. The living room looked like a crime scene if the crime was man gives up on life. Empty beer bottles lined the coffee table like sad little soldiers. The TV was frozen on some infomercial for a vegetable chopper that promised to change my life, and my phone was blowing up with notifications that I absolutely did not want to read. But the universe wasn't done kicking me while I was down, because at precisely 7:47 a.m., my mother called. Of course she did. Mothers have this supernatural ability to sense when their children's lives are imploding from up to 300 miles away, and mine had the tracking skills of a bloodhound crossed with an NSA surveillance satellite. I let it ring twice before accepting that ignoring Linda Martinez was about as effective as trying to stop a tsunami with a pool noodle. Michael Anthony Martinez, she started, using my full government name like I was 12 years old and had just been caught stealing cookies before dinner. I need you to tell me why Rachel's car has been parked outside the hospital staff housing for the last 3 nights, because Dolores from church saw it, and she told Patricia, who told me during our morning walk, and now half the town thinks your wife is having an affair with that doctor. I pressed the heel of my hand against my forehead and contemplated whether it was too early to start drinking again. Ma, it's not even 8 in the morning. Can we schedule this crisis for a more reasonable hour? Like never. Don't you get smart with me, Mijo. Is it true? Because if it's true, I'm going to march down to that hospital and It's true, Ma. I cut her off because there was no point in pretending anymore. Small towns are like living inside a fishbowl filled with piranhas who gossip. I found out last night. Well, technically this morning at 1 a.m., which is apparently when all good marriages go to die. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds before my mother launched into a rapid-fire combination of Spanish and English that would have made a drill sergeant weep with admiration. I held the phone away from my ear and let her get it out of her system, occasionally interjecting with "yes, Ma," and "I know, Ma," at what I hoped were appropriate intervals. After I finally extracted myself from the maternal inquisition with promises to come over for dinner later, because apparently nothing says, "Your life is falling apart," quite like your mom's enchiladas, I surveyed my kingdom of sadness. The apartment we'd shared for 3 years looked different in the harsh morning light. Wedding photos on the mantle that now felt like evidence of a crime. My police academy graduation photo hanging next to Rachel's nursing school diploma. Both of us looking so damn young and optimistic it made me want to punch something. A ring of faded coffee cup stains on the side table that mapped out every morning we'd sat together, scrolling through our phones and pretending we were still connected. The rain started around 9, because of course it did. This was turning into a full-blown country song, and I half expected my dog to die and my truck to break down, except I didn't have a dog and my truck was running fine, which somehow made everything worse. Rachel showed up at 10:23 a.m. I know the exact time because I was staring at the clock, willing the day to end, when I heard her key in the lock. She still had a key. I'd need to change those locks. Professional hazard of being a locksmith is knowing exactly how vulnerable your own security is. She walked in looking like she'd been through a war zone, still wearing those damn scrubs, and I wondered if that was intentional, like wearing a uniform would somehow legitimize whatever explanation she was about to serve up. "Mike, please, just listen to me," she started, and I held up one hand like a traffic cop at the world's most depressing intersection. "Let me guess," I said, leaning back against the kitchen counter with my arms crossed. It was an emergency, a medical emergency that required Dr. McDreamy to personally tend to you at 1 in the morning, using your phone to text me because his fingers were too busy saving lives or whatever excuse you two workshopped on the drive over here. She flinched like I'd slapped her, but pushed forward with the kind of determination that comes from rehearsing a story until you almost believe it yourself. There was a problem with a patient's foreline. Gavin was helping me troubleshoot it, and I was so exhausted from the double shift that I fell asleep in his office. That's it. That's all that happened. I laughed, a short, bitter bark that didn't contain an ounce of actual humor. You fell asleep in his office. Right. And he just happened to use your phone to text me like he owned it. Tell me, in this heartwarming episode of Grey's Anatomy Goes to Hell, why exactly was Dr. Price comfortable enough to send me a message from your phone? Do you two share phones regularly? Is that a new hospital policy I'm not aware of? Mike, you're being ridiculous. No, Rachel, I'm being rational, which is apparently a foreign concept in whatever reality you've been living in. I pushed off the counter and started pacing, because standing still felt like surrender. You want to know what's ridiculous? The fact that you think I'm stupid enough to buy this after-school special bullshit you're selling. Oh no, officer, I didn't know how the drugs got in my car. That's what you sound like right now. Her face crumpled, and she sank into the armchair. My armchair, the one I'd inherited from my grandfather. Like her legs couldn't hold her up anymore. It's been months of distance between us, Mike. Months of you working late on locksmith calls. Months of me pulling double shifts. Months of us passing each other like roommates instead of partners. I felt alone. I felt invisible. So you chose a late-night drama with your boss instead of, I don't know, suggesting couples counseling? Instead of having one single honest conversation with your husband. I stopped pacing and looked at her dead on. You felt alone, so you made sure I'd feel alone too. That's some real partnership right there. She was crying now, full-on sobbing into her hands, and part of me, the part that had loved her since we met at that ridiculous hospital charity auction 6 years ago, wanted to comfort her. But the bigger part, the part that had spent the last 9 hours replaying every suspicious moment from the past few months, was too busy being angry to care about her tears. If this was really an emergency, I said, letting the sarcasm drip from every word like acid, why didn't Dr. Price wear scrubs to my doorstep? Why did he show up in a white coat like he was making a house call at 1 in the morning? Did he stop to change? Was there a wardrobe consultation? Because I'm just trying to understand the logistics of this medical emergency that required both of you to show up at my door looking like you just fled a telenovela set. She didn't have an answer for that. She just sat there, crying into her hands, while the rain beat against the windows and turned the whole scene into exactly what it was, a tragedy that nobody asked for, but everyone saw coming. I gave Rachel exactly 45 minutes to cry in my apartment before I told her she needed to leave. Not because I'm heartless, though at that particular moment I was doing a pretty solid impression of a man whose heart had been put through a wood chipper, but because if I had to watch her sob into her hands for one more second, I was either going to start screaming or start crying myself, and neither option seemed particularly productive. She left with all the dramatic flair of a soap opera actress exiting stage left, taking her keys with her because I hadn't had the energy yet to tell her I'd be changing the locks by tomorrow morning at the latest. The second her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Frank Sullivan, listed in my phone as Frank the Tank, Bad Ideas Department. Frank was my old partner back when I was still wearing a badge and pretending I had my life together, before I'd hung up my gun and decided that picking locks was somehow less stressful than picking up the pieces of other people's disasters. Turns out, I was wrong about that, but that's a different therapy session. Frank had left the force about 2 years before I did, deciding that working for the city paid in good intentions and shit benefits, whereas running his own private investigation firm paid in actual money and came with the added bonus of choosing which idiots to work for. He'd set up shop in a small office above a Chinese restaurant downtown, and the whole place perpetually smelled like sweet and sour pork and disappointment. It was perfect for him. I hit the call button and listened to it ring twice before Frank's voice came through, gravelly and suspicious like a bouncer interrogating someone with a fake ID. This better be important, Martinez. I'm elbow deep in a cheating spouse case, and the photos I'm looking at are making me lose my faith in humanity. Frank, my wife sleeping with her boss. I found out via text message at 1 in the morning, and I need someone to either talk me down from a ledge or help me dig up enough dirt to bury him. Your choice. I delivered this information with the emotional inflection of someone reading a grocery list, because at this point I'd moved past hysterical and landed firmly in the neighborhood of numb. There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that meant Frank was processing this information and calculating exactly how deep into the mess he was about to get. Jesus Christ, Mike. Rachel? You're Rachel? The nurse who makes those little jokes about proper hand hygiene and bakes cookies for hospital fundraisers. That's the one. Turns out she's been doing a lot more than baking cookies, if you catch my drift. I sank back onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster like they might spell out some kind of answer. The guy's name is Dr. Gavin Price. He's her boss at County General, drives a BMW that probably costs more than my entire year's salary, and has the kind of face that makes you want to punch it on principle. Hold that thought. I'm coming over. Don't do anything stupid in the next 20 minutes. Frank hung up before I could argue, which was probably for the best, because I absolutely would have argued that everything I was thinking about doing qualified as stupid, and I was going to do it anyway. True to his word, Frank showed up 19 minutes later looking exactly like Frank always looked, built like a bouncer who'd eaten a smaller bouncer for breakfast, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better decades, and carrying 2 enormous cups of coffee that smelled like they could resurrect the dead. He handed me one without a word and settled into the armchair that Rachel had vacated, his weight making the old furniture creak in protest. Talk, he commanded, sipping his coffee like it was a life support system and he'd die without it. Frank drank coffee the way other people breathed, constantly, compulsively, and with the kind of dedication usually reserved for religious zealots or people training for ultramarathons. So I talked. I told him everything, starting with the 1:03 a.m. text and ending with Rachel's pathetic explanation about falling asleep in Gavin's office after a stressful situation. I told him about the look on Gavin's face when he showed up at my door, about my mother's phone call, and the fact that apparently half the town had been watching my marriage disintegrate in real time while I'd been blissfully ignorant. I told him about the coffee cup rings on my table and the wedding photos that now felt like crime scene evidence. Frank listened without interrupting, which was one of his best qualities. He just sat there, drinking his coffee and occasionally nodding, letting me purge all the poison that had been building up in my system since the early morning hours. When I finally ran out of words, he set down his coffee cup and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, fixing me with the kind of look that had probably made suspects confess to crimes they didn't commit back when he was still wearing a badge. Here's the thing about liars, Mike. They think they're smarter than everyone else. They think they can spin a story and cover their tracks, and nobody will ever know the truth. But liars always make mistakes because they're too busy remembering the lies to remember the details. He picked up his coffee again and took a long drink. You want my professional opinion? This wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't some moment of weakness or a bad decision made in the heat of the moment. This has been going on for a while, and they've been careful about it, which means there's a pattern. And patterns leave evidence. What kind of evidence? I asked, leaning forward because suddenly this felt less like wallowing in self-pity and more like actually doing something productive with my rage. Paper trail, bank records, phone logs, credit card statements. People lie. Mike, people lie all the damn time. But phones don't lie. Money doesn't lie. Digital footprints don't lie. Frank was getting animated now, shifting into his investigator mode like a superhero putting on a cape. You want to know the truth? I mean the real, actual, documented truth that holds up in divorce court and makes your lawyer smile? Then we need to look. Not shotgun revenge. Not yet. Just good old-fashioned fact-finding. Detective work. The boring, methodical kind that actually gets results. I felt something shift in my chest, some combination of relief and purpose that made me sit up straighter. I want to look. I want to know everything. Every text, every call, every time they met up and thought they were being clever. I want the whole damn story. That's what I like to hear. Frank grinned, and it was the kind of grin that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Now, tell me everything you know about this Dr. Price character. Where he works, where he lives, what kind of car he drives, if he's got a history. I'll start running background checks, see what skeletons are hiding in his closet. Guys like this, doctors with God complexes who think they can screw around with their subordinates, they usually have a pattern. This probably isn't the first time, which means there might be other victims, other stories, other people who'd love to see him get what's coming to him. I could use my locksmith skills to help with the investigation. I offered, only half joking. You know, open some closed cases. Literally. Frank groaned and threw a couch pillow at my head. Jesus Christ, Martinez, that's the worst pun I've heard all week, and I spent yesterday talking to a bail bondsman who exclusively communicates in dad jokes. But yeah, your skills might actually come in handy if we need to. Let's say, gain access to certain areas for documentary purposes. Documentary purposes. I like that. Very professional. I was actually smiling now, which felt bizarre given that my life was currently on fire, but there was something about having a plan, having Frank in my corner, that made the whole disaster feel less like drowning and more like swimming toward shore. I'll start digging into Price's background today, Frank said, standing up and draining the last of his coffee. Public records, professional history, any complaints filed against him, social media presence, the works. You focus on documenting everything from your end. Every conversation with Rachel, every suspicious detail you remember from the last few months, every piece of evidence that might be useful. Write it down, screenshot it, save it. We're building a case here, and cases are built on details. He headed for the door, then turned back with that serious expression he used to wear when we were about to raid a drug house back in the day. Mike, one more thing. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. You need to be prepared for that. When you start digging into people's secrets, you don't always like what you find. You ready for that? I thought about Rachel crying in my armchair. I thought about Gavin's smug face at my doorstep. I thought about the 1:03 a.m. text and the 9 hours of hell that had followed. Yeah, I said, I'm ready. 3 days after Frank started his investigation, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It came through at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday while I was in the middle of rekeying the locks at a real estate office, sweating through my work shirt and contemplating whether I should just change my own damn locks already or continue living in this weird limbo where my cheating wife technically still had access to my apartment. The text was short and cryptic in that way that immediately makes you think either someone's trying to sell you car insurance or your life is about to get more complicated. We need to talk. It's about Rachel and Gavin. Lila. Rachel's friend Lila Chun, who taught overpriced spin classes at that boutique fitness studio downtown, where people paid $40 to ride a stationary bike in a dark room while someone yelled motivational garbage at them. Lila, who posted Instagram stories of her green smoothies and acai bowls with captions about wellness journeys and finding your authentic self. Lila, who I'd always privately suspected was one of those people who preached health and positivity while secretly stress-eating cookie dough at midnight and contemplating the meaninglessness of existence. I stared at the text for a solid 30 seconds, my fingers covered in graphite and lock lubricant, trying to decide if this was a trap or an opportunity. On one hand, Lila was Rachel's friend, which meant she was potentially enemy territory. On the other hand, she was reaching out to me about Rachel and Gavin, which meant either she had information or she was about to deliver some kind of intervention that would make me want to throw myself into traffic. I texted back, Coffee Bean on Main. 6 p.m. Come alone and don't tell Rachel. Because apparently I was living in a spy movie now, and everything had to be dramatic and clandestine. She responded immediately, already planning on it. See you there. The Coffee Bean was one of those aggressively hipster establishments where the baristas had ironic mustaches and the menu featured things like deconstructed lattes, an artisanal cold brew infused with the tears of free-range coffee plants, or whatever pretentious nonsense they were calling regular coffee these days. I showed up 10 minutes early because old cop habits die hard, ordered something called an Americano that cost $7 and tasted like regret, and claimed a corner booth where I could see the door. Lila walked in at exactly 6 o'clock, and I had to hand it to her. She looked exactly like someone who was about to either save my life or ruin it further. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized hoodie that said, Namaste in bed, carrying one of those enormous water bottles that fitness people use to prove they're hydrated and therefore superior to the rest of us mortals. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, so tight it probably gave her a headache, and she had that look on her face, the one that said she was nervous, guilty, and determined all at once. She spotted me, took a breath like she was preparing for battle, and made her way over with the kind of walk that suggested she'd rather be literally anywhere else. She slid into the booth across from me without ordering anything, which I respected because it meant she wanted to get straight to business. Thanks for meeting me, she started, and her voice had that shaky quality that people get when they're about to confess something they really don't want to confess. I've been going back and forth on whether to reach out for the last 3 days, and I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. It's eating me alive. Well, that makes 2 of us, I said, wrapping my hands around my overpriced coffee. So what's this about? And please don't tell me you're here to defend Rachel or explain how I misunderstood the situation, because I've already had my fill of gaslighting this week, and it's only Thursday. Lila shook her head so hard her ponytail whipped back and forth like a pendulum of denial. No. God, no. I'm not here to defend anyone. I'm here because, she stopped, pulled out her phone, and set it on the table between us like it was a live grenade. I'm here because I have proof. Proof that this is so much worse than you think. And I need you to know that I didn't realize what was happening until it was too late, and I feel like absolute garbage about it. My heart rate kicked up a notch, that old familiar feeling from my cop days when a witness was about to crack and give you the key to the whole case. What kind of proof? She unlocked her phone with trembling fingers and pulled up her screenshots folder. There's a group chat. It's called the On-Call Club. It's, Jesus, Mike, it's disgusting. It's a bunch of doctors and nurses, mostly men, and they use it to brag about their conquests. Like it's some kind of game. Like the people they're sleeping with are just points on a scoreboard. She turned the phone toward me, and I felt my stomach drop as I scrolled through the screenshots. The chat was exactly what she'd described. Crude, mean, filled with the kind of locker room talk that made you lose faith in humanity. There were names, dates, inside jokes that made my skin crawl. Emoji reactions that ranged from fire symbols to eggplants to thumbs ups. Like these people were congratulating each other on ruining marriages and betraying trust. And there, right in the middle of it all, was Gavin Price's name. Not just participating, leading. He was the ringleader of this disgusting little club, posting updates like he was some kind of conquest coordinator. Late shift scored me another point. Martinez's wife is easier than I thought. Husband's a locksmith. Ironic since he can't lock down his own marriage. Faced with tears of joy, I stared at those words until they burned into my retinas. The casual cruelty of it. The way he'd reduced Rachel to a point, a joke, a punchline in his twisted game. The way he'd thrown in that dig about me, about my profession, like it was all just hilarious entertainment for him and his band of medical professionals who'd apparently skipped the do no harm part of their training. There's more, Lila said quietly, and she scrolled down to show me additional messages. Rachel's name appeared multiple times. Details about their encounters that made me want to throw my $7 coffee against the wall. Comments from other members of the chat congratulating Gavin, making jokes, treating the whole thing like it was fantasy football, but with real people's lives. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. The chat's been active for at least 2 years, from what I can tell. Rachel's name started appearing about 4 months ago. Lila pulled her phone back and hugged it to her chest like it contained classified information. Mike, I need you to understand, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know it was this bad. Rachel told me she was interested in someone at work, that there was chemistry, and her voice cracked. I helped her cover. I lied for her. I told you she was with me on nights when she wasn't. I thought it was just flirting, maybe some harmless emotional affair that would fizzle out. I didn't know there was a whole hunting club treating women like trophies. I wanted to be angry at her. Part of me was angry at her. But the bigger part recognized that she was here, now, with evidence, looking like she wanted to crawl into a hole and die from guilt. That counted for something. Why are you showing me this now? I asked. What changed? I saw the messages from the night you found out. After you texted Gavin, the chat went crazy. They were laughing about it, Mike. Laughing about you finding out, making jokes about how you'd react, taking bets on whether Rachel would go back to you or stick with Gavin. She looked like she might cry, and I noticed for the first time that she probably hadn't slept much in the last few days. And that's when I realized this wasn't some romantic affair or forbidden love story. This was predatory. This was cruel. These are people with power using that power to manipulate others, and then bragging about it like they're collecting baseball cards. I laughed. A dark, throat-clearing sort of laugh that contained zero actual humor and 100% bitter recognition of how absurd my life had become. Let me get this straight. My wife's having an affair with her boss, who's part of some kind of medical professional sex club where they share notes on their conquests like they're comparing their fantasy football lineups. And you helped cover for her because you thought it was romantic. Does that about sum it up? When you say it like that, it sounds even worse, Lila whispered. That's because it is worse. It's cartoonishly bad. It's so bad it loops back around to being almost funny, except on the punchline, so it's actually just soul-destroying. I rubbed my face with both hands. Can you send me those screenshots? Already done. I airdropped them to your phone while you were reading. She finally reached for her water bottle and took a long drink, like she needed to hydrate after purging all these secrets. There's something else you should know. I'm not the only one who helped cover. There are other people, friends, co-workers, who knew things were happening and either didn't care or actively participated in keeping secrets. This whole thing is bigger than just Rachel and Gavin. Of course it is, I muttered. Because why would my personal disaster be contained and manageable when it could be a full-blown conspiracy involving multiple accomplices? Lila stood up, gathering her things with the energy of someone who'd just completed a mission and desperately needed to escape. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so sorry I was part of this. I'm going to have to live with that guilt for a long time. But I thought you deserved to know the truth. All of it. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who probably did drink kale smoothies while hiding whiskey in her water bottle, someone who preached wellness while drowning in her own mess, someone who was trying to do the right thing even though it was way too late. Thanks for this, I said, gesturing to my phone where the screenshots now lived. I mean that. This is proof. Proof is a delicious, cold thing, Lila. You just gave me ammunition. She nodded and left without another word, leaving me alone in my corner booth with my cold coffee and my smoking gun. I pulled up the screenshots again and scrolled through them slowly, methodically, memorizing every crude joke and casual cruelty. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they could keep their little club secret, laugh at their victims, and never face consequences. They forgot that every lock has a key, and I was very, very good at finding them. Frank showed up at my apartment 4 days after my coffee shop confession session with Lila, carrying a folder that was thicker than my old police vest and had that particular weight that comes from containing someone's entire history of being a garbage human being. He didn't knock, just used the spare key I'd given him back when we were partners and I still believed in things like trust and friendship, and walked in to find me sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by printouts of the On-Call Club screenshots, a legal pad covered in notes that probably made me look like a conspiracy theorist, and enough empty coffee cups to qualify as a health hazard. "You look like hell," Frank said by way of greeting, setting the folder down on the table with a thud that sent some of my papers flying. "When's the last time you slept? Or showered? Or consumed anything that wasn't liquid caffeine?" Bold words coming from a man who considers coffee a food group. I shot back, but I couldn't really argue with his assessment. I'd been living in the same pair of sweatpants for 2 days. My hair was doing something that could charitably be called abstract art, and I'm pretty sure I smelled like a combination of lock lubricant, desperation, and poor life choices. Please tell me that folder contains something that will make me feel better about the fact that my wife joined a sex cult and I was too stupid to notice. "It's not a sex cult. It's just a group of entitled assholes with medical degrees and no moral compass," Frank corrected, dropping into the chair across from me. "But yeah, this folder's going to make your whole week. Maybe your whole month. Possibly your whole year, depending on how much you enjoy watching people get what they deserve." He flipped open the folder with the dramatic flair of a magician revealing his best trick, and I found myself staring at a collection of documents that looked like they'd been compiled by someone with an axe to grind and a really good filing system. Complaint forms, HR reports, legal documents with official-looking letterheads, personnel files that probably weren't supposed to be accessible to civilians, but Frank had ways of obtaining things that I'd learned long ago not to ask too many questions about. "Meet Dr. Gavin Price's greatest hits collection," Frank announced, tapping the top document with one finger. "Turns out your wife's boyfriend has a history longer than a CVS receipt and about as pleasant to look at. I'm talking complaints going back 7 years, 3 different hospitals, and a pattern of behavior that would make a behavioral psychologist salivate with how textbook it is." I pulled the first document closer, squinting at the dense legal language that seemed specifically designed to obscure the actual content while still technically documenting it. It was a complaint filed by a nurse named Jennifer Kaufman back in 2018, detailing how Dr. Price had made repeated inappropriate comments about her appearance, suggested they discuss her career advancement opportunities over drinks, and then became hostile and vindictive when she declined his advances. The complaint had been filed with HR at his previous hospital, investigated for approximately 30 seconds, and then quietly filed away with a note that said, "Matter resolved through mediation." Matter resolved through mediation. I read aloud, letting the sarcasm drip from every syllable. That's corporate speak for, we paid her to go away and hoped nobody would notice, right? Bingo. Frank pulled out another document, this one from a different hospital in 2019. "This is Jessica Torres. Similar story. Dr. Price pursued her aggressively. She initially reciprocated because she was young and flattered that a senior physician was paying attention to her. And then when she tried to end things, he made her work life a living hell. Switched her to the worst shifts, gave her poor performance reviews, made comments in front of other staff about her being emotionally unstable. She filed a complaint and, surprise, surprise, it was resolved through a confidential settlement that included an NDA. He kept pulling documents out of that folder like a depressing magic trick that just kept going. Sarah Chun in 2020. Amanda Rodriguez in 2021. Melissa Grant in 2022. Each story followed the same basic pattern with slight variations. Dr. Gavin Price identified a target, usually someone younger or in a subordinate position, pursued them with a combination of charm and professional intimidation, got what he wanted, and then either discarded them or made their lives miserable when they tried to assert boundaries. And every single time, the hospital administration had responded with what could generously be called aggressive apathy, and more accurately be called active cover-up. "How many are there?" I asked, feeling something cold and angry settling in my chest like a block of ice that had decided to take up permanent residence. That I could find with a week of digging? 8 documented complaints across 3 different hospitals. But here's the thing, Mike. Those are just the ones who actually filed formal complaints. You know how many people experience harassment or assault and never report it? The numbers are depressing as hell. For every complaint in this folder, there's probably 3 or 4 other people who stayed quiet because they were scared of retaliation or didn't think anyone would believe them or just wanted to move on with their lives. Frank pulled out another section of documents, these ones looking more recent and official. And this is the really interesting part. County General, where he works now, where Rachel works, they knew. They freaking knew about his history when they hired him 2 years ago. They did a background check, they saw the complaints, and they hired him anyway, because he's a good doctor with an impressive resume, and apparently being a predator is just a minor personality flaw that can be overlooked if you're good at your job. I stared at the pile of evidence, feeling that cold anger crystallize into something sharp and focused. So what you're telling me is that this guy has been doing this for years. Multiple women have tried to hold him accountable, and the system just keeps protecting him because hospitals are more interested in covering their asses than actually dealing with the problem. That's exactly what I'm telling you, Frank confirmed. This guy knows how to work the system. He knows which lines to not quite cross. He knows how to make settlements happen quietly. He knows how to position himself as the victim when complaints get filed. He's got it down to a science. The man's basically a professional predator with a medical degree and a really good lawyer. Well, isn't that just fantastic? I muttered, running my hands through my hair and probably making it stick up in even more ridiculous directions. My wife didn't just cheat on me with some random guy. She cheated on me with a serial predator who has an entire system in place for getting away with it. I'm not sure if that makes it better or worse. It makes it ammunition, Frank said, leaning forward with that intense look he got when he was really into a case. Look, Mike, I know this is personal for you. I know you're hurt and angry and probably fantasizing about various creative ways to make this guy suffer. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to be smart about this. We're going to collect all the proof. We're going to find these women, and we're going to give them choices. What kind of choices? I asked, though I was already starting to see where Frank was going with this. The choice to come forward together. The choice to break their NDAs. Because NDAs don't hold up when there's a pattern of criminal behavior or when public safety is at risk. The choice to stop being isolated victims and start being a coordinated force that actually has the power to hold this bastard accountable. Frank was getting animated now, gesturing with his hands like he was conducting an invisible orchestra of justice. 1 complaint gets buried. 2 complaints get settled quietly. 8 complaints from 8 different women all coming forward at the same time. That's a pattern. That's a story. That's the kind of thing that doesn't go away with a quiet settlement and a confidential agreement. I felt something like hope stirring in my chest, mixing with the anger and the hurt, and creating some kind of volatile emotional cocktail that probably wasn't healthy, but definitely felt productive. So we reach out to these women. We show them they're not alone. We build a case that's too big to ignore. Exactly. And we document everything. Every conversation, every piece of evidence, every connection between these cases. We make this airtight. Frank tapped the folder again. This guy thinks he's untouchable because he's always been untouchable. He thinks he can keep doing this forever because the system has always protected him. But systems are made of people, and people can be persuaded to do the right thing when the evidence is overwhelming and the public is watching. I picked up one of the complaint forms, reading through the details of how Dr. Price had systematically destroyed Jennifer Kaufman's career after she rejected him. You know what really gets me? I said, it's not just that he's a predator. It's that he's smart about it. He documents things in his favor. He builds paper trails that make his victims look unstable or vindictive. He uses his position and authority to gaslight people into thinking they're the problem. This isn't some crime of passion or moment of weakness. This is calculated. This is a man who sees other people as objects to be collected and discarded. Which is why we're going to take him down using his own methods, Frank said with a grim smile. He likes documentation? We'll give him documentation. He likes playing the system? We'll use the system against him. He thinks he's always 2 steps ahead. We're going to be 3 steps ahead with better evidence and more witnesses. I made a joke about Gavin's bedside manner. Must be tender as a stapler and twice as sharp. But underneath the sarcasm, the anger was humming like a live wire. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. Wasn't just about my wounded pride or my broken marriage. This was about every woman whose name was in that folder. Every victim who'd been silenced. Every person who tried to speak up and been crushed by a system that valued reputation over justice. So where do we start? I asked Frank, already mentally preparing myself for what was coming. We start by reaching out, Frank said. Carefully, respectfully, and with the understanding that some of these women might not want anything to do with this. But we give them the choice. We show them the pattern. We let them know they're not alone. He stood up and gathered the folder. And then, my friend, we watched Dr. Gavin Price's carefully constructed house of cards come tumbling down. I looked at the folder, at the evidence of years of harm, and felt that cold anger settle into something like purpose. Good, I said. Let's get to work. Sophie Price called me on a Tuesday morning while I was in the middle of installing a smart lock system for a paranoid tech entrepreneur who was convinced his business partners were trying to steal his app idea. The name on my phone screen just said, unknown caller. And normally, I'd let that go to voicemail because unknown callers are usually either telemarketers trying to sell me extended car warranties or robots informing me that my social security number has been compromised and I need to send gift cards immediately to fix it. But something made me answer. Maybe intuition or maybe just the fact that my life had become so weird that unknown callers could literally be anything from long-lost relatives to hitmen to aliens trying to make first contact. Is this Michael Martinez? The voice was female, composed, and had that particular edge that comes from someone who's done crying about their problems and moved into the strategic planning phase of revenge. Depends on who's asking and whether you're about to serve me papers, I said, because at this point I wouldn't have been surprised if Rachel had decided to sue me for emotional distress or some equally insane legal maneuver. This is Sophie Price, Gavin's ex-wife. She let that sink in for exactly 3 seconds before continuing. I heard through the hospital grapevine that you're collecting information about my ex-husband's extracurricular activities, and I think we should talk. I have things you'll want to see. I nearly dropped my drill. Gavin's ex-wife. The woman who'd been married to this predator before he'd moved on to terrorizing the nurses at County General. I'd known he was divorced. Frank had mentioned it in his background research. But I hadn't considered that his ex might be a potential ally in this whole mess. That was stupid of me, actually, because ex-wives are basically walking databases of dirt on their former spouses, especially when those former spouses are serial cheaters with God complexes. I'm listening, I said, stepping away from my paranoid client who was busy explaining his 17-step authentication system that would definitely keep out intruders and definitely drive him insane within 6 months. Not over the phone. Lunch. Today. There's a diner called Rosie's on the east side. You know it? Her tone suggested this wasn't really a question so much as a statement of how things were going to be. I know it. 12:30 work for you. See you there. And Mr. Martinez? Come alone. This isn't the kind of conversation that needs an audience. She hung up before I could respond, which seemed to be a theme in my life lately. People dropping bombshells and then disappearing before I could process the information properly. I finished up the smart lock installation in a daze, took my payment from the paranoid tech guy, and spent the drive to Rosie's diner trying to figure out what exactly Gavin's ex-wife wanted from me and whether this was going to be helpful or just add another layer of complexity to my already absurdly complicated situation. Rosie's Diner was one of those classic American establishments that had probably been serving coffee and disappointment since the 1950s, with red vinyl booths that were held together more by duct tape and hope than actual structural integrity, and a menu that featured things like meatloaf surprise, where the surprise was probably food poisoning. I spotted Sophie the second I walked in, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall, like she was either paranoid or used to being in situations where knowing all the exits was important. She looked exactly like someone who'd been married to Gavin Price and lived to tell the tale. Mid-30s, professionally dressed in a way that screamed, I have a real job and real responsibilities, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of sharp, intelligent eyes that suggested she'd stopped being naive around the same time she'd stopped being married. She wasn't traditionally beautiful. She was better than that. She was the kind of woman who looked like she could calculate your net worth, your moral failings, and the exact amount of bullshit you were trying to sell her all in the time it took you to say hello. I slid into the booth across from her, and we did that awkward thing where two people who are connected only by the fact that their respective spouse and ex-spouse are terrible human beings try to figure out how to start a conversation. You look better than I expected, Sophie said, which was possibly the strangest opening line I'd ever received. I was picturing someone more, I don't know, destroyed. Gavin has a way of destroying people. Give it time. I'm a slow-motion car crash, I replied, flagging down a waitress who looked like she'd been working at Rosie's since the actual 1950s. Coffee. Black. Strong enough to strip paint. Sophie ordered the same, which immediately elevated her in my estimation because people who drink black coffee are either serious or dead inside, and in this context both were acceptable. We sat in silence while the waitress shuffled off, and I used the time to study the woman across from me, trying to figure out what her angle was and whether I could trust her or if this was some elaborate setup orchestrated by Gavin to throw me off track. I'm going to cut to the chase, Sophie said once our coffees arrived, and she slid a small flash drive across the scarred Formica table like we were in a spy movie and she was passing state secrets. I kept everything. Photos, audio recordings, text messages, emails, video clips that Gavin saved on his personal computer because he's the kind of narcissist who documents his own crimes. It's all on here. I stared at the flash drive like it might explode. Why? Why keep all this? And why give it to me now? Sophie took a long drink of her coffee, and I could see the weight of years of anger and hurt and strategic patience in her expression. I kept it as insurance. When I found out about Gavin's affairs, and yes, plural, your wife is far from the first, I was young enough and stupid enough to think about forgiving him. I believed his excuses about stress and long hours and how these women threw themselves at him. But I wasn't so stupid that I deleted the evidence. I backed everything up, multiple copies, in multiple locations. I told myself it was just in case, just for protection, just to have leverage if things got ugly. And things got ugly? I prompted, though I already knew the answer. Things got nuclear, Sophie confirmed with a bitter smile. Gavin doesn't just cheat. He collects. He keeps score. He saves messages and photos and recordings of private moments like their trophies. He has folders on his computer organized by name and date, ratings of his conquests, notes about which ones were easy and which ones required more work. He's not a man having affairs. He's a predator documenting his kills. My stomach turned over, and I had to set down my coffee cup before I threw it against the wall. Jesus Christ. He's actually keeping records? Like this is some kind of sick game? It's exactly a sick game to him. And the worst part? He's smart about it. He never keeps anything that could be traced back to him professionally. No hospital emails, no work phones. Everything's on his personal devices, encrypted and password protected. He thinks he's untouchable. Sophie leaned forward, and her eyes had that gleam that comes from someone who's been waiting years for the right moment to strike. But I had access to everything when we were married. I copied files before the divorce. I saved passwords. I documented patterns. And I've been sitting on this information for 3 years, waiting for the right time to use it. Why now? I asked. Why not use this during your divorce? Why not go to the police or the medical board or literally anyone with authority? Because I was scared, Sophie admitted, and there was no shame in her voice, just cold pragmatism. Gavin has money, connections, lawyers who could bury me in legal fees until I was bankrupt. During the divorce, I used the threat of exposing him to get a better settlement, but I never actually followed through because I didn't have the resources to fight him in court and in public opinion. But you, she pointed at me with one finger. You have nothing to lose. Your marriage is already over. He's already destroyed your life. And from what I hear through the grapevine, you're building a case with multiple victims and actual evidence beyond what I have here. I picked up the flash drive, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to contain so much damage. What exactly is on here? Everything, Sophie said simply. Recordings of phone calls where he brags to his friends about his latest conquest. Video clips he secretly recorded during intimate moments. Some of the women knew they were being filmed, some didn't. Text message threads where he discusses strategy for seducing nurses and medical students. Photos he saved as mementos. And most damning of all, a spreadsheet. An actual Excel spreadsheet where he tracked names, dates, ratings, and notes about each woman. He called it his personal achievement log. I call it evidence of systematic predatory behavior. I felt a cold sense of satisfaction wash over me. The kind of feeling you get when all the scattered pieces of a puzzle suddenly click into place and form a picture that finally makes sense. This wasn't just evidence. This was the industry of excuses finally getting an invoice. This was documentation that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as misunderstanding. This was Gavin Price's own meticulous records condemning him. Why are you giving this to me? I asked one more time, because I needed to understand her motivation. What do you get out of this? Sophie finished her coffee and stood up, preparing to leave. I get to watch him fall. I get to know that I played a part in stopping him from hurting more people. And I get to sleep at night knowing I finally did something instead of just sitting on evidence and protecting myself. She pulled out a $20 bill and dropped it on the table for the coffee. Use it well, Mr. Martinez. Make sure it counts. Because if you screw this up, he'll know where the information came from, and I'll have to disappear. She walked out of the diner like a queen who'd just abdicated her throne, tired, relieved, and finally free of a burden she'd been carrying too long. I sat there with the flash drive in my hand, feeling its weight, knowing that I was now holding the key to everything. The invoice had finally arrived, and it was time to make Gavin Price pay his bill. The County General Hospital annual charity gala was scheduled for Saturday, October 18th, which gave me exactly 2 weeks to transform from a bitter, angry locksmith into an audiovisual terrorist with a flair for dramatic public humiliation. The gala was one of those black tie affairs where rich people paid $500 a plate to eat rubber chicken and feel good about themselves while the hospital administration paraded around their star physicians like prized livestock at a county fair. And this year's guest of honor, the physician being celebrated for his outstanding contributions to patient care and hospital excellence, was none other than Dr. Gavin Price himself, because apparently the universe has a twisted sense of humor and decided that the man who'd been systematically destroying lives deserved a trophy and a standing ovation. When Frank told me about the gala, I'd laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. You're kidding me. They're giving him an award? What's it for? Most creative use of power dynamics. Outstanding achievement in the field of being a complete bastard. It's the Healer of the Year award, Frank had said with the kind of straight face that suggested he was also appreciating the irony. Given annually to a physician who demonstrates exceptional dedication to their patients and exemplary professional conduct. The nomination was apparently submitted by the hospital board before your little situation came to light, and they're too far into the planning to back out now without raising questions. And that's when the idea hit me with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. Why not use the gala itself as the stage for Gavin's downfall? Why skulk around filing complaints and hoping the system would eventually work when I could literally hijack his moment of triumph and turn it into a public execution? It was elegant. It was mean. It was the kind of poetic justice that made my locksmith heart sing. Because if there's one thing I understand, it's that the best way to break into something is to use the existing infrastructure against itself. I laid out the plan to Frank over beers at his office, which still smelled like sweet and sour pork and broken marriages, while he listened with the expression of a man who was simultaneously impressed and concerned about my mental stability. So let me get this straight, he'd said, after I'd finished my pitch. You want to hack into the hospital's AV system during the gala, plug in Sophie's flash drive, and broadcast Gavin's greatest hits to a room full of donors, hospital administrators, and local media. You want to turn his award ceremony into a true crime documentary. Not hack. That sounds illegal and complicated. I prefer gain authorized access through my extensive knowledge of security systems and the fact that I personally installed the locks on the AV control room 6 months ago when the hospital upgraded their equipment. I'd grinned at him with the kind of manic energy that probably should have concerned me, but instead felt liberating. I'm a locksmith, Frank. I know every entrance, every access point, every vulnerable spot in that building, because half the staff has called me at one point or another to let them into rooms they've locked themselves out of. I'm not breaking in. I'm just opening doors that are already there. Frank had stared at me for a long moment before breaking into a grin that matched mine. You magnificent, vengeful son of a bitch. This is either the best idea you've ever had or the worst, and I genuinely can't tell which. Why not both? I'd replied, already mentally mapping out the logistics. Over the next 2 weeks, I became intimately familiar with the County General Hospital event space, the AV setup for the gala, and the exact sequence of events planned for the evening. I reached out to Tommy Chun, a guy I knew from my cop days who'd left the force to become an AV technician because he'd decided he'd rather work with equipment than people, and who owed me a favor from that time I'd helped him get out of a sticky situation involving his ex-girlfriend, a restraining order, and a misunderstanding about who actually owned the PlayStation. Tommy was more than happy to give me a crash course in basic AV system operation, especially when I told him it was for a surprise presentation at a hospital charity event. "You're not going to do anything that'll get me in trouble, right?" Tommy had asked nervously, showing me how to connect external drives to the projection system. "Define trouble," I'd replied, which in retrospect probably wasn't the most reassuring answer. But Tommy had shrugged and showed me the rest of the system anyway, because he was a good friend and also because he secretly loved the idea of chaos unfolding in formal settings. Frank handled what he called the legal infrastructure, which meant making sure we had reporters lined up who'd actually show up to the gala and pay attention when things went sideways. He reached out to Maria Gonzalez at the local news station, an investigative journalist who'd been trying to break a story about hospital misconduct for years and was basically salivating at the prospect of a scandal this juicy falling into her lap. He also contacted a few freelance journalists who specialized in medical ethics violations, plus a blogger who ran a popular site about holding powerful institutions accountable. Frank was building an audience, making sure that when the show started, there'd be people there to document it and spread the word. "We're not just exposing Gavin," Frank explained over one of our planning sessions. "We're creating a moment that can't be ignored or swept under the rug. We're making sure there are enough witnesses and enough media coverage that the hospital has no choice but to respond publicly instead of handling this quietly behind closed doors like they've done with every other complaint against him." Lila became our inside coordinator, the person who kept nervous nurses calm and made sure that the women who'd agreed to come forward knew what was happening and when. She'd reached out to several of Gavin's victims, carefully, respectfully, explaining that there was going to be a public reckoning and asking if they wanted to be present for it or if they preferred to stay away and let their evidence speak for itself. Some chose to attend the gala, wanting to watch Gavin's face when his world collapsed. Others decided to stay home, but gave Lila permission to represent their stories. A few wanted nothing to do with any of it and asked to be left alone, which we respected because this was about giving people choices, not forcing them into another situation where they had no control. Lila was perfect for this role because she had that combination of fitness, instructor peppiness, and genuine empathy that made people trust her even when she was basically recruiting them for an ambush. She'd text me updates throughout the week. "Got 3 more confirmed attendees. Jessica Torres wants to be there. Sarah Chun is flying in from Colorado because she says she wouldn't miss this for anything." And each message felt like another piece clicking into place. Sophie was the quiet fire in the background, the quality control specialist making sure that every file on the flash drive was authentic, admissible, and devastating. She went through the recordings and photos with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that suggested she'd been preparing for this moment for years, organizing everything chronologically, creating a presentation that told a clear story from beginning to end. She put together a highlight reel that was only 12 minutes long, but contained enough evidence to bury Gavin 6 feet under, complete with audio clips of him bragging about his conquests, screenshots of the on-call club chat, and excerpts from his infamous spreadsheet with names redacted to protect the victims, but numbers clearly visible. 12 minutes. Sophie had told me when she handed over the finalized flash drive. That's all you need. 12 minutes of his own words, his own documentation, his own systematic predation laid out in a way that even the most willfully ignorant administrator can't dismiss. I've timed it to sync with the planned award presentation. Right after they announce his name and he takes the stage, you start the video. Maximum impact, maximum humiliation. We rehearsed the plan until I could execute it in my sleep. Frank would be positioned near the exits with his journalist contacts, ready to intercept anyone who tried to shut down the presentation or flee the scene. Lila would be scattered throughout the audience with the victims who chose to attend, providing moral support and making sure everyone felt safe. Sophie would be in the back of the room, watching from the shadows like the ghost of Gavin's past coming back to haunt him. And I would be in the AV control room, which I had keys to, naturally, because I'd installed the locks, ready to plug in the flash drive at exactly the right moment and turned the hospital's celebration into a public trial. It was elegant in its simplicity. We weren't relying on the system to deliver justice. We were creating our own system, using the tools available to us, fitting the key into the last lock of a house built entirely on lies and professional courtesy. The hospital wanted to celebrate Dr. Gavin Price's contributions? Fine. We'd show them exactly what he'd been contributing to. The night before the gala, I sat in my apartment with the flash drive in my hand, thinking about how I'd gone from a locksmith with a failing marriage to a man orchestrating what was essentially a coordinated public execution using PowerPoint and a sound system. It was absurd. It was probably illegal in ways I hadn't fully considered. It was definitely going to blow up my life even more than it was already blown up. But it was also necessary. Because men like Gavin Price don't stop on their own. They don't develop consciences or suddenly decide to change their behavior. They keep going until someone stops them, until the cost of their actions finally exceeds the benefit, until the locks they've been hiding behind get picked by someone who knows exactly how locks work. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop one more time, watching Sophie's carefully crafted presentation play through. 12 minutes of truth, 12 minutes of receipts, 12 minutes of a man condemning himself with his own evidence. If this becomes a soap opera, I expect royalties, I muttered to myself, channeling my nervous energy into sarcasm because that's what I did best. Tomorrow night, Dr. Gavin Price would walk onto that stage expecting applause and admiration. Instead, he'd get accountability served cold in public. I couldn't wait. The morning of the gala arrived with the kind of ominous gray sky that suggested even the weather knew something dramatic was about to go down and wanted to set the appropriate mood. I woke up at 6 a.m. without an alarm, which is what happens when your brain decides that sleep is for people who aren't about to commit social terrorism against their wife's boyfriend in front of 200 of the county's most influential citizens. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for approximately 45 seconds before giving up on the pretense of rest and hauling myself into the shower, where I stood under scalding water and mentally rehearsed the evening's plan for the 11,000th time. The flash drive was sitting on my kitchen counter next to my coffee maker, plugged into my laptop for one final review. I'd watched Sophie's presentation so many times I could probably recite the whole thing from memory, complete with the audio clips of Gavin bragging about his conquests and the screenshots of his disturbing spreadsheet. 12 minutes of carefully curated evidence that would either change everything or blow up spectacularly in my face. And at this point, I was 50-50 on which outcome was more likely. I made coffee, strong enough to wake the dead and possibly power a small vehicle, and was in the middle of my second cup when my phone rang. Rachel's name lit up the screen, and I stared at it like it was a live grenade that had just materialized in my kitchen. She hadn't called since the morning after our doorstep confrontation 2 weeks ago, communicating only through terse text messages about logistics like who was paying which bills and whether I'd forwarded her mail. The fact that she was calling now, on this specific morning, meant one of two things. Either she'd somehow found out about the plan, or her guilty conscience had finally kicked into overdrive. I let it ring 3 times while I debated whether answering would be cathartic or just painful, then accepted the call because apparently I was a glutton for punishment and also because part of me, the stupid, sentimental part that remembered loving this woman, needed to hear what she had to say. Mike. Her voice came through sounding wrecked, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept or possibly both. Mike, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. Well, you've got me on the phone, so talk, I said, keeping my voice flat and emotionless because if I let any actual feeling through, this conversation was going to go sideways fast. Though I have to say, your timing is interesting. Got something you need to get off your chest on this fine Saturday morning? I ended things with Gavin. She said it quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid, and I could hear the desperation underneath the words. 2 days ago, I told him it was over, that I made a mistake, that I want to try to fix things with you. I know I don't deserve another chance, but Mike, we've been together for 6 years. We have history. We had something real. Please, I'm begging you to consider couples counseling. We can work through this. I laughed, and it came out harsh and bitter, like broken glass being ground into salt. You ended things 2 days ago. 2 days ago. After 4 months of sneaking around, after lying to my face, After letting your boss text me from your phone at 1 in the morning like I was some irrelevant obstacle to be dismissed. And now you want counseling? Now you want to work through this? Rachel, the audacity is actually impressive. Like, if they gave out awards for sheer nerve, you'd be taking home a trophy tonight. I know I screwed up. Screwed up? I cut her off, feeling the anger that I'd been carefully controlling start to leak through. Screwed up is forgetting to take out the trash or accidentally dyeing my white shirts pink in the laundry. What you did was make a conscious choice, repeatedly, for months, to betray me with your boss while I was home thinking we were just going through a rough patch. That's not screwing up, Rachel. That's systematic deception. She was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing, but I couldn't make myself care the way I would have even 3 weeks ago. Something fundamental had broken between us. Some foundation stone that you can't just glue back together with tears and promises of counseling. Mike, please. Her voice cracked. I love you. I never stopped loving you. Gavin was. He was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake that I regret more than anything. But it's over now. I've blocked his number. I've put in for a transfer to a different department. I'm doing everything I can to make this right. Let me ask you something, I said, and my voice came out colder than I'd intended, sharp enough to cut. Did Gavin record you? Did he take photos, videos, save your text messages? Did he document your relationship like it was some kind of conquest he wanted to remember? The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched out for 5 seconds, then 10, and in that silence I heard everything I needed to know. The fear, the realization, the understanding that whatever promises Gavin had made about privacy and discretion were as worthless as his marriage vows had probably been. He promised he deleted everything. Rachel finally whispered, and she sounded small and scared and young in a way that made something twist painfully in my chest despite my anger. After I told him we were done, he said he'd delete all the messages and photos. He promised, Mike. He said. He promised? Yeah, like men in dramas promise. I interrupted, and the sarcasm was back in full force because it was easier than acknowledging the part of me that still hurt for her, that recognized she'd been played by someone with a lot more experience in manipulation than she had. Let me tell you something about Gavin Price that you apparently haven't figured out yet. He doesn't delete anything. He collects. He saves. He documents every conquest like he's building a museum dedicated to his own ego and other people's bad decisions. So no, Rachel, he didn't delete your messages. They're probably backed up in 3 different cloud storage accounts with labels and dates and maybe even ratings. Her crying intensified, dissolving into the kind of sobbing that comes from genuine fear and the dawning realization that you've been way more naive than you thought possible. Oh God, Mike, you have to help me. If those photos get out, if people see, my job, my reputation, my family. Now you care about your job and reputation? The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was too far gone to pull them back. Where was that concern 4 months ago when you were making the choice to sleep with your boss? Where was that forward thinking when you were letting him photograph intimate moments? I didn't know, she practically shouted, and there was genuine anguish in her voice. I didn't know he was recording some of it. I didn't know he saved everything. I didn't know about the other women or the chat group or... She stopped, and I could hear her trying to compose herself. Wait, how do you know about all this? How do you know what Gavin does? Because unlike you, I did my homework, I said flatly. When I found out my wife was cheating, I didn't just sit around crying into my beer. I investigated. I talked to people. I found evidence. And let me tell you, Rachel, what I found is so much worse than you cheating with your boss. What I found is a pattern of predatory behavior going back years, multiple victims, systematic abuse of power, and documentation that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. There was another long pause, and when Rachel spoke again, her voice was shaking. Mike, what are you planning to do? Why are you telling me this? Because tonight is the hospital gala, I said, and I was surprised by how calm I sounded, how collected, like I was explaining the weather instead of my plans to destroy her boyfriend's career. Tonight, Gavin gets his award for being Healer of the Year or whatever bullshit title they're giving him. And tonight, everyone at that gala is going to see exactly what kind of healer he really is. No. It came out as a whisper, then stronger. No, Mike, you can't. Please. I'm begging you. Don't do this publicly. Don't make this a spectacle. It'll destroy me too. Everyone will know. My colleagues, my friends, my parents. You should have thought about that before you let Gavin take pictures, I said, and part of me recognized I was being cruel, but the bigger part was too angry and hurt to care. You made your choices, Rachel. You chose to have an affair. You chose to trust a man who collects women like baseball cards. You chose to believe his promises. And now you get to live with the consequences of those choices, just like I have to live with the consequences of marrying someone who betrayed me. Mike, please. Stop. I cut her off, suddenly exhausted by the whole conversation, by the pleading and the tears and the last-minute appeals to my better nature. Stop begging. Stop making promises you won't keep. Stop acting like you can fix this with enough crying and apologies. It's done, Rachel. We're done. Whatever you thought we had is gone, and you killed it yourself. You can hide if you want to. You can call in sick to the gala, stay home, pretend none of this is happening. But you can't unsend what's already been saved. You can't delete files that have already been backed up in multiple locations. The truth is coming out whether you like it or not, and you get to decide whether you face it or run from it. She was sobbing openly now, but I felt nothing except a hollow sort of finality, like closing a door on a room you know you'll never enter again. If this becomes a soap opera, I expect royalties, I said, and I meant it half seriously, half as a defense mechanism against the part of me that was hurting along with her despite everything. I hung up before she could respond, before she could beg more or promise more or say anything else that might make me reconsider. I set my phone face down on the counter and finished my coffee, looking at the flash drive sitting next to my laptop. Tonight, the truth came out. Tonight, everyone would see what I'd been seeing for weeks. And if Rachel got caught in the blast radius, well, actions have consequences, and she'd earned hers. The County General Hospital annual charity gala was exactly as pretentious as I'd imagined, which is to say it looked like someone had taken a Pinterest board labeled classy medical event and vomited it all over the hospital's conference center with no regard for subtlety or taste. There were ice sculptures shaped like stethoscopes, because nothing says we care about healthcare quite like expensive frozen water that'll melt into a puddle by the end of the night. White tablecloths covered every surface, each table featuring centerpieces of roses and lilies that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a string quartet was playing softly in the corner like this was a 19th century European ball, instead of a fundraiser in a mid-sized American city where half the attendees were just here for the open bar and tax-deductible charitable donations. I'd arrived early, dressed in the only suit I owned, a charcoal gray number I'd worn to my wedding and then subsequently to about 4 funerals, which felt grimly appropriate given what I was about to do. Frank had secured me a ticket through one of his contacts who worked in hospital administration, a woman named Patricia who'd been one of Gavin's victims 3 years ago and was absolutely thrilled to facilitate his public execution. She'd even helped me get access to the AV control room earlier in the day, letting me in with her staff badge while I pretended to be checking the security on the door locks and definitely not installing a backup system that would prevent anyone from shutting down the presentation once it started. The room was filling up fast with exactly the kind of people you'd expect at a $500 a plate charity dinner. Wealthy donors in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, hospital board members who all looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog for successful people who make important decisions, local politicians glad-handing their way through the crowd like they were campaigning even though nobody was voting on anything tonight. And of course the medical staff, doctors and nurses, dressed in their formal best, pretending they weren't all secretly hoping the bar would stay open late enough to make the speeches tolerable. I spotted Frank near the east entrance, looking uncomfortable in a suit that probably hadn't been worn since his daughter's wedding 2 years ago, standing next to Maria Gonzalez from Channel 7 News and at least 3 other journalists I recognized from Frank's briefings. They were all trying to look casual, like they were just here for the chicken and the charitable cause, definitely not waiting for a scandal to erupt that would give them the story of the year. Lila was scattered throughout the crowd with several women I recognized from Frank's victim folder: Jennifer Kaufman, Jessica Torres, Sarah Chun, who'd flown in from Colorado specifically for this. All of them looking nervous and determined in equal measure, like soldiers waiting for a battle they'd been training for their entire lives. Sophie was in the back of the room, exactly where she'd said she'd be, wearing a black dress that made her look like she was attending a funeral, which was fitting since we were about to bury Gavin's career alive. She caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod, a gesture that said, "It's time," and "Good luck," and "Burn it all down," all in one slight movement. The ceremony started at 7:30 with all the pomp and circumstance of people who take themselves way too seriously. The hospital CEO, a silver-haired man named Richard Beaumont, who had the kind of authoritative voice that made you think he'd never been wrong about anything in his entire life, took the stage and launched into a speech about County General's commitment to excellence and community service. He thanked the donors, praised the staff, made some jokes that landed with varying degrees of success, and generally did all the things that people do when they're killing time before the main event. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Dr. Alvarez, the chief of staff, a stern woman in her 50s who looked like she'd personally performed open-heart surgery on her own sense of humor and removed it entirely, stepped up to the microphone to introduce the evening's honoree. "It is my great privilege," she began, reading from note cards like she was announcing the winner of an Oscar, "to present this year's Healer of the Year award to a physician who embodies everything we value at County General Hospital. His dedication to his patients is unmatched. His commitment to excellence in medical care is an inspiration to us all. He represents the very best of what it means to be a healer in our modern healthcare system. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Gavin Price." The applause started, polite at first, and then building as Gavin made his way to the stage with the kind of confident stride that comes from someone who genuinely believes they deserve every bit of praise they're about to receive. He looked exactly like he always looked in my mental picture of him. Handsome in that generic television doctor way, impeccably dressed in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my truck, with that smile that I now recognized as the expression of a predator who'd gotten away with everything and expected to keep getting away with it forever. He shook hands with Dr. Alvarez, accepted the crystal trophy that probably also cost more than my truck, and stepped up to the microphone with the crystal award held high like he'd just won the Super Bowl of being a terrible human being. The applause continued, and I watched from my position near the AV control room as he basked in it, soaking up the admiration like a plant that had been genetically modified to feed exclusively on ego and false praise. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, the voice of someone who'd given speeches before and knew exactly how to work a crowd. "I am truly humbled by this recognition. When I became a doctor, I made a commitment to serve my patients with compassion, integrity, and that's when I hit the trigger." The lights dimmed slightly. I'd programmed that into the sequence because if you're going to ruin someone's life, you might as well do it with dramatic lighting. And the massive projection screens on either side of the stage flickered to life. Gavin stopped mid-sentence, confused, turning to look at the screens with that expression people get when technology does something unexpected and they're not sure if it's part of the show or a malfunction. The first slide appeared, a screenshot of the On-Call Club chat group, blown up to 15 feet tall and crystal clear in high definition. The group name was visible at the top, along with the list of members, 23 names, including Gavin's right at the top with the little crown emoji next to it that designated him as the group administrator. Below that, message after message of crude jokes, conquest comparisons, and the kind of locker room talk that would make a frat boy blush. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people paying attention, but the shocked silence of people trying to process what they're seeing and coming up short on explanations that make sense. Then came the audio. Gavin's voice, recorded from one of Sophie's save files, playing through the conference center's surround sound system with perfect clarity. Late shift scored me another point. Martinez's wife is easier than I thought. Husband's a locksmith. Ironic since he can't lock down his own marriage. Followed by laughter. Is laughter the sound of someone who thought this was hilarious instead of sociopathic? I watched the color drain from Gavin's face as he stood there on stage, trapped in a spotlight, watching his own words condemn him on screens the size of billboards. He started to move, reaching for Dr. Alvarez, trying to say something, but the presentation just kept rolling with the mechanical efficiency of truth that doesn't care about excuses. More screenshots. The spreadsheet, his personal achievement log with names redacted but numbers clearly visible. 47 entries over 7 years. Ratings from 1 to 10. Notes about difficulty level and whether they'd been worth the effort. Clinical, cold, documented proof that this wasn't romance or even just garden variety cheating. This was systematic predation treated like a hobby that required meticulous record-keeping. The shock in the room was turning into something else now. Horror, disgust, anger. I could see it rippling through the crowd like a wave. Faces contorting, hands covering mouths. People turning to their neighbors with expressions that asked, "Are you seeing this? And is this real?" People were standing up, some moving closer to see better, others backing away like the screens might be contagious. Rachel, because of course she'd shown up despite my warning, was sitting at a table near the front with some of her nursing colleagues, and I watched her collapse forward with her face in her hands, her whole body shaking with sobs that I could see even from across the room. Lila was crying too, though whether from relief or trauma or just the overwhelming emotion of watching justice finally happen, I couldn't tell. The presentation reached its crescendo, a video clip of Gavin at what looked like a bar, drunk and bragging to someone off camera about his conquests, referring to the nurses at County General as his personal hunting ground, and joking about how easy it was to manipulate women who were exhausted from double shifts and looking for validation from authority figures. His own face, his own voice, his own words, recorded and saved and now playing for everyone to see. I stepped out of the shadows then, walking toward the stage with my hands in my pockets and my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Someone needed to speak, to narrate what everyone was seeing, to make sure there was no room for misunderstanding or spin. "Good evening," I said, and my voice came out clear and flat through the microphone system because I'd planned for this too, had tested the audio earlier to make sure I could be heard. "My name is Michael Martinez. That's my wife that Dr. Price was bragging about. And what you're watching isn't a misunderstanding or a technical glitch or some kind of elaborate prank. This is documentation. This is evidence. This is Dr. Gavin Price in his own words, with his own records, showing you exactly who he is when he thinks nobody's watching." The crowd was in full chaos now. People shouting, some trying to leave, others pulling out phones to record what was happening because we lived in an age where if it wasn't on social media it might as well not have happened. Dr. Alvarez was yelling something at the AV staff, trying to get them to shut it down, but my backup system was doing exactly what I designed it to do, playing through to the end regardless of what buttons anyone pushed. Gavin finally found his voice, and he started to flail verbally, trying to explain, to excuse, to spin this into something other than what it obviously was. "This is taken out of context. This is a violation of my privacy. You don't understand. Is there a warranty on that charm?" I called out, my voice cutting through his protests with the kind of dry sarcasm that had gotten me through the last 3 weeks. "Because it seems to be malfunctioning pretty badly right now." Some people laughed, nervous, shocked laughter, the kind that happens when something is so awful that humor becomes a defense mechanism. Others just stared, and in their faces I saw the dawning realization that everything they'd thought they knew about Dr. Gavin Price was a carefully constructed lie. Security was moving toward the stage now, not to stop the presentation, but to escort Gavin out as the crowd turned hostile. People were shouting at him, "You broke us," and "How could you?" and phrases considerably less polite that I'm not going to repeat because this story is already dark enough without adding creative profanity. The presentation ended exactly 12 minutes after it started, the screens going dark and the lights coming back up to reveal a room full of people who would never look at County General Hospital or Dr. Gavin Price the same way again. Mission accomplished. Morning news, social media, text messages, the whole digital universe exploded overnight. Gavin was on administrative leave, probably getting fired once the lawyers figured out how to phrase it without getting sued. The hospital launched an internal inquiry, which is corporate speak for, "We're going to look really busy while we figure out how to cover our asses." Some nurses came by to say thank you. Others wouldn't make eye contact. Small towns are brutal with gossip, and Rachel's reputation was thoroughly torched. She might keep her job. She might not. Honestly, not my problem anymore. Sophie disappeared like a spy who'd completed her mission. Lila left town to teach spin classes somewhere with fewer whispers. Frank went back to his PI work, cracking fewer jokes about retirement. I went home to a house that felt different, not empty, just honest. The locksmith finally had his favorite kind of quiet, unlocked. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I just wanted truth. Turns out truth was cleaner than living a lie. They thought they'd locked me out. They forgot who makes the keys. My wife cried in court with fake bruises and marks. A $600 per hour lawyer, and claims I hit her. She wanted my business, the kids, and $22,000 per month. The judge believed her, until I played the video of her applying the makeup. If hell had a waiting room, it would smell exactly like that courthouse. Old paper, bad coffee, and regret marinated in air conditioning. My name's Michael Rowan. I'm 43, co-founder of Rowan Freight, father of 2, and, as of 9:13 a.m. that Tuesday, apparently the villain in a Lifetime movie. You ever watch one of those courtroom dramas where the husband's the bad guy? The violent one, the manipulative one, the guy who looks guilty even when he blinks? Yeah, that was me. Except I wasn't acting. I was just sitting there in a suit that felt 2 sizes too tight, and wondering if this was what rock bottom smelled like. Rachel, my wife, or I guess ex-wife in training, sat 10 feet away in her Navy power suit, dabbing her eyes like she was trying to win an Oscar for most tragic victim in a fabricated drama. Her tears could have hydrated California. Every sniffle sounded rehearsed. And right beside her, Harper Dawes, her $600 an hour legal bulldog, sat with a folder so thick it could have stopped a bullet. The woman had a jawline sharp enough to slice deli meat and an expression that said, "I haven't laughed since the Bush administration." She stood, cleared her throat, and said the words that turned my morning into an emotional mugging. "Your Honor, this is a case of domestic violence." Now, I've heard gunshots before, once during a delivery route gone wrong in Newark, but nothing hits like that sentence did. My chest went cold. My hands went slick. The whole room shifted like gravity, suddenly got personal. I'm supposed to be the dad who grills on weekends and builds Lego sets on demand, not the guy people whisper about at PDA meetings. The jury leaned in like they were watching cable news live from the apocalypse. A reporter scribbled so fast her pen squeaked. Somewhere behind me, I swear someone gasped. Meanwhile, my attorney, Mason Colby, leaned over and whispered, "Breathe." Mason's one of those guys who dresses like an expensive threat, tailored gray suit, silk tie, hair so precise you'd think he uses a laser comb. He's calm in a way that makes you nervous. He mouthed again, "Calm." I nodded, even though my heart was trying to tap dance its way out of my ribcage. Harper went on, her voice smooth and venomous. "We have photographic evidence, Your Honor. Bruising, emotional trauma. We're seeking full custody and financial reparation." She opened her folder like she was presenting the Ark of the Covenant, and out came glossy color photos of Rachel's face, purple and yellow patches across her cheek. The jury collectively exhaled like a horror movie crowd. I wanted to scream, "It's fake," but Mason put a hand on my arm, the international lawyer's signal for don't blow your case before the coffee break. The judge, an older woman with reading glasses perched halfway down her nose, turned to me with that, "I've seen too many of your kind" look. I could practically feel her gavel warming up. And that's when Mason, bless his expensive soul, stood up. "Your Honor, before we proceed, the defense would like to introduce Exhibit A." Now, if you've never been in court, let me paint the vibe. Silence so thick you can hear your own career crumbling, and the only thing breaking it is your heartbeat and the occasional cough from someone who forgot how to whisper. Mason walked over to the media cart. Yes, we brought a cart like it was show and tell day, and connected his laptop. The big courtroom screen flickered to life, and there she was, Rachel, my sweet, tearful, victimized wife. Except this version of her wasn't crying. She was calm, focused, sitting in front of her vanity, stippling foundation and purple eyeshadow onto her cheekbone with the precision of a makeup artist who missed her calling. You could hear the faint hum of her favorite podcast in the background, True Crime Queens. The irony was too poetic. She leaned in closer to the mirror, muttered something about needing more yellow to make it look real, and smiled at her reflection. The room went dead quiet. You could have heard an eyelash hit the floor. The judge's eyes narrowed, then widened. The bailiff's mouth fell open. Rachel's lawyer froze mid-breath, color draining from her face like someone had pulled the plug. Rachel's tears stopped instantly, like someone had hit the mute button on her performance. The jury's collective gasp was the kind of sound you usually only hear in stadiums or funerals. Mason let the footage play on loop, twice, because the universe deserved to enjoy that moment in HD. Then he turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, the defense rests, for now." I wanted to stand and slow clap. I wanted to high-five God, but instead, I sat there, still as stone, letting the silence chew on Rachel's lies. I watched her hand twitch toward her face, like she wanted to cover the evidence of her own fake evidence. Harper Dawes tried to recover, flipping through her papers as if she could somehow file away the humiliation. "Your Honor, this could be taken out of context," she managed to say. The judge tilted her head. "Ms. Dawes, context would require a second person in the room. Unless your client is both the abuser and the abused, I suggest you tread carefully." Boom. That was the sound of legal fireworks. The hearing wrapped faster than a TikTok dance. The judge adjourned pending further review, which is lawyer code for, "I need to recover from that plot twist." As people filed out, whispers followed me like paparazzi drones. "Did you see that video? He had proof. She made it up?" Every sentence was half disbelief, half gossip. The kind of stuff that becomes fuel for office small talk by lunchtime. Rachel stayed seated, staring straight ahead. Her eyes were dry now, sharp, almost calculating. The way someone looks when their perfect plan catches fire. I didn't say anything to her. Didn't gloat. Didn't smirk. I just grabbed my briefcase, nodded to Mason, and walked out. But inside, my emotions were doing parkour. Anger, relief, disbelief, all somersaulting together. Outside, the courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters. Cameras flashing, microphones waving like seaweed in a storm. "Mr. Rowan, is it true your wife faked her injuries? Do you have a statement? Are you suing her for defamation? Are you guilty of anything?" I wanted to answer, yes, guilty of marrying the wrong person, but Mason grabbed my arm before I could open my mouth. "Not today, Mike. Let it simmer." We ducked into his black sedan, and I finally exhaled. Mason loosened his tie. "That footage saved your ass," he said, matter of fact. "Where'd you even get it?" I smirked, still processing the chaos. "Long story involving a bad cat and a suspicious noise. You wouldn't believe me. Try me," he said. "Let's just say Rachel's not the only one who likes gadgets. I installed a hidden camera months ago because I thought we had a raccoon problem." Mason actually laughed. The dry, tired laugh of a man who's seen too many human disasters and finally found one worth drinking over. "Remind me to send your raccoon a thank you card." I leaned back against the seat and stared out the window at the courthouse disappearing behind us. My phone buzzed nonstop, texts from friends, co-workers, even my sister. One said, "OMG, just saw you on TV. You're trending." Another said, "Proud of you, bro. Also, your wife's a psycho." Both accurate. I didn't reply. My mind was stuck replaying every moment of the hearing. The way Rachel looked when her lie collapsed, the way Harper's confidence cracked, the way the judge's face softened just a little when she looked at me afterward. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a monster. I felt human again. Mason dropped me at my office, or what was left of it. Rowan Freight. My name on the glass door looked like it was judging me. The reception desk was empty. The air smelled like coffee gone cold and fear of bad publicity. The staff had either taken the day off or were hiding behind HR-approved silence. I went straight to my office, shut the door, and finally let out the kind of laugh that comes from pure, unfiltered absurdity. Think about it. My wife fakes injuries, accuses me of abuse, cries in court, and then gets exposed by my own accidental surveillance footage. You can't make that up. Netflix would call it unrealistic. The laugh turned into something else, half hysteria, half exhaustion. When it stopped, I realized I wasn't happy. Not really. Vindicated, sure. Relieved, absolutely. But happy? No. Because I knew this wasn't over. Rachel wasn't the type to retreat quietly. She was the type who'd reload. I sat there, staring at the framed photo of our kids on my desk, Emma and Josh, ages 9 and 11. They had Rachel's eyes, my smile, and zero idea that their mom had just tried to turn their dad into a courtroom headline. That hurt the most. The idea that one day, they'd Google my name and find this circus. I closed my eyes and muttered, "God, if you're listening, maybe throw me a memo next time before my life turns into a legal thriller." The office door creaked open. It was Janet, my assistant, holding a cup of coffee. "You looked like you needed this," she said softly. I smiled, took it, and said, "If this has whiskey in it, you'll get a raise." She chuckled nervously. "Everyone's talking about what happened." "I bet they are," I said, sipping the coffee. "Tell them to wait for the sequel." I think it's called How to Survive a Marriage Explosion. When she left, I sat back and stared at the ceiling. The adrenaline was fading, and all that was left was fatigue, the kind that seeps into your bones. I thought about Rachel again, about how good she'd been at pretending, how her tears had looked real even when her heart wasn't. And I realized something terrifying. I hadn't been married to a person. I'd been married to a performance. That night, when the evening news replayed the courtroom footage, I sat in my living room with the lights off, watching my life become primetime content. The anchor's voice was serious. New developments in the Rowan domestic case. Evidence suggests the allegations were fabricated. Then they cut to Rachel's photo, smiling like butter wouldn't melt. My phone buzzed again. "Mason, you did good today," he said. "Yeah," I replied, staring at the screen. "But good doesn't feel good yet." He paused. "Give it time. The truth always wins. It just takes the scenic route." I hung up, turned off the TV, and sat there in the dark, somewhere between anger and peace. The world had just watched my worst nightmare flip on its head, and all I could think was, how the hell did I end up here? That was the day my life got served. Not just legally, emotionally, spiritually, and yeah, with a side of tears. But here's the thing about being broken in public. It either destroys you or rewires you. I didn't know it yet, but that courtroom wasn't my downfall. It was my reboot. 3 months before the courtroom circus, my biggest problem in life was that Rachel kept using my beard trimmer to reshape her eyebrows. If you told me then that I'd soon be starring in my own legal drama, I would have laughed, poured another cup of coffee, and said something sarcastic about Netflix options. But here we are, living proof that life doesn't just hand out lemons. Sometimes it lobs them at your head like it's trying to knock sense into you. Back then, I was still under the illusion that Rachel and I were in what therapists call a rough patch. You know, the kind where you convince yourself that arguments, icy silences, and mutual eye-rolling are just the price of long-term love. We'd been married 12 years. 12 good years if you averaged the first 3 and ignored the last 5. Things had gotten tense. Not the fun kind of tension you fix with a weekend trip and champagne, but the kind that makes you Google how to tell if your spouse secretly hates you. It started small. Rachel stopped laughing at my jokes, which was tragic because I'm hilarious. She started sleeping with her phone under her pillow, a classic rookie move for anyone trying to be sneaky. Then came the whispers on late-night calls, the half-smiles at text notifications, and the emotional distance you could measure in light years. I told myself, she's just stressed. I mean, who isn't? Between her part-time charity work, my company, the kids, and our house that needed more repairs than a 90s Honda, stress was basically our third roommate. Then one Thursday night, I walked into the bedroom and caught her on the phone. Her tone was low, not romantic low, but scheming low, like she was negotiating a hostage release. I paused in the hallway because even though I'm not nosy by nature, marriage changes you. Suddenly you're fluent in analyzing sighs and decoding pauses. And then I heard it. The sentence that would stick in my brain like a bad jingle. "Once I get the children and half his company, we'll be set." At first, I thought I'd misheard. Maybe she said half his company's time or half his mind. You know, something poetic and slightly unhinged. But nope. She said exactly what she meant, and she said it like someone planning a business expansion. The call ended with a soft laugh and a "good night, Victor." I stood there, frozen, like an idiot holding a laundry basket full of regrets. I didn't even know a Victor. Well, not yet. Later, I'd find out he was a divorce attorney. One of those guys who probably practices smiling in the mirror to make sure it looks expensive. That night, I didn't confront her. Oh no, I went full stealth mode. You don't walk into the lion's den screaming boo. You gather data. You watch. You learn. Because if marriage taught me anything, it's that sometimes silence is louder than a fight. Now, about that camera, the romantic discovery, as I like to call it. It was pure accident. 2 weeks after the phone call, I was packing for a weekend logistics conference in Dallas. Rachel was in the kitchen pretending to organize mail while sneakily scrolling through her phone. I was tossing shirts into a suitcase when I heard this faint beeping sound near her vanity. At first, I thought it was her electric toothbrush, or maybe our cat, Muffin, who had a knack for knocking over expensive things. But then I saw it, a tiny red light blinking from behind the perfume bottles. Curiosity may have killed the cat, but it resurrected my common sense. I moved the makeup bag aside and found a small black device, my device, to be precise. Months ago, I'd installed a mini security camera after complaining about weird noises in the night. Rachel had rolled her eyes at me, called me paranoid, and told me I watched too many spy thrillers. I forgot all about it. Apparently, she didn't. I sat on the bed, plugged the SD card into my laptop, and braced myself. If this were a movie, dramatic music would have started playing right then. The screen loaded, and there she was, Rachel, in perfect lighting, doing something I can only describe as Oscar-worthy stupidity. She was applying purple and yellow makeup to her own cheek, tilting her head, checking angles, and then taking photos. She even paused mid-application to sigh and mutter, "He'll never see this coming." My brain short-circuited. You ever feel every emotion at once? Anger, confusion, disbelief, heartbreak. It's like emotional roulette, and the ball just kept landing on WTF. I watched her practice crying faces in the mirror. Literal crying faces. She'd tear up, look at herself, shake her head, and say, "Too much." Then she'd try again. If there were awards for psychological warfare, she'd have cleaned house. I sat there in total silence for at least 10 minutes, just staring at the laptop. Then I laughed. One of those hollow, humorless laughs that sound like they belong in a therapy session. "At least she has good contouring technique," I said out loud to no one. Because when your wife's fake bruises become your evening entertainment, humor's all that's left between you and madness. I didn't confront her that night either. Nope. I decided to play dumb and collect more evidence. The next day, I acted like everything was fine, kissed her on the cheek, made breakfast, cracked my usual dad jokes about how burnt toast is just charcoal with ambition. She laughed, probably because she thought she was winning. Meanwhile, I was backing up the footage on 3 drives like a man securing nuclear codes. I started noticing more details after that. Her new obsession with documenting everything. She'd take selfies showing off the bruises, sometimes even asking me to stand near her. Once, she said, "Can you put your arm around me?" And I swear I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes when I hesitated. I realized she wasn't asking for affection. She was staging evidence. The betrayal hid in waves. It wasn't just that she was lying. It was that she was rewriting history, painting me as something monstrous when all I'd ever done wrong was forget anniversaries and occasionally snore like a leaf blower. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how someone could share a bed with you while planning your destruction. That's when I started digging. I called an old friend, Nate, who worked in IT and owed me a few favors from our college days. "Hey," I said, "hypothetically, if someone wanted to check phone records and maybe track a number to a certain divorce attorney named Victor, how illegal would that be?" Nate chuckled. "Illegal enough that I'm in. Text me the number." Within a week, he had enough digital breadcrumbs to feed an army of lawyers. Late-night texts between Rachel and Victor discussing strategy, custody narratives, and public sympathy. They even had code words. She called me Subject A, like I was part of a science experiment. There was also mention of a Harper, who would later appear in my life as the attorney with the resting wrath face. So, yeah, I had the footage, the messages, the motive. I just needed timing. Because timing, as Mason later said, is the difference between justice and a very expensive therapy bill. But life wasn't done mocking me yet. One Sunday morning, Rachel walked into the living room wearing sunglasses, indoors, and announced, "Michael, we need to talk." I muted the TV, braced for impact, and tried to look like a supportive husband. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice trembling in that way people practice when they want to sound fragile. "You've been different. Distant. Angry." I sipped my coffee. "Angry. Yes. The kids feel it too," she said, lowering her voice. "You've scared us." I almost spit out my drink. "Scared you?" "Rachel, the scariest thing I've done this month is try to assemble that IKEA bookshelf." She ignored the joke. "I think it's best if we take some space." Now, normally, when someone says space, they mean emotional breathing. Room. Rachel meant legal chess move. I saw it in her eyes. She was laying groundwork for the Abusive Husband Forced Separation Act. I nodded slowly and said, "If that's what you need." Because sarcasm might be my default setting, but I wasn't stupid enough to show my hand. The next week, she started taking photos around the house. Random things. A broken lamp, courtesy of our cat, a scratch on the wall, my empty beer bottles, all staged neatly like a crime scene exhibit. I almost asked if she wanted better lighting. My humor kept me sane. When she started acting like I was the villain in her personal telenovela, I started narrating my life like a sitcom. Previously, on Married and Misled, I'd mutter to myself while making coffee. It was either that or lose my mind. Then came the day she slipped. I came home early from work and heard voices in the dining room. Rachel's and Aman's. Not Victor, not anyone I knew. This guy sounded like he belonged in a true crime podcast. I peeked through the hallway, and there she was, sitting across from some slick-looking stranger in a suit, whispering about settlement numbers and contingency plans. She spotted me mid-sentence, and the look on her face could have powered a horror movie. "Who's this?" I asked casually, leaning on the doorway. "This is just a friend," she stammered. "Ah," I said. "The kind who wears a Rolex and brings legal pads?" He mumbled something about confidential consultation and practically sprinted out the door. I didn't stop him. I just looked at Rachel and smiled. That calm, quiet smile that says, "I know more than you think I do." That night, I copied every file, every text, every second of footage onto a private cloud folder named Plan B. Because when your marriage starts to feel like espionage, you learn to back up everything: your files, your sanity, your heart. I wish I could say I confronted her dramatically, maybe with a monologue and background music. But the truth is, I didn't. I waited, because I knew she'd make her move soon, and when she did, I wanted to be ready. Not angry, not broken, ready. I spent those weeks playing the perfect husband, school drop-offs, dinners, polite conversation. She probably thought she was nailing her performance. Meanwhile, every date night and family photo was just another step closer to her public downfall. Looking back, that's when I stopped loving her. Not out of rage, but out of clarity. Love can survive mistakes, even lies, but not deliberate destruction. Once someone starts painting bruises for profit, the relationship's not on life support. It's in the morgue. So yeah, that's how I found the camera and my spine. I didn't know it then, but that tiny blinking red light was about to save my life. And if you're wondering whether I felt bad about spying on my wife, let me put it this way. If you're plotting to ruin me on national television, you don't get privacy points. Sometimes love ends with a goodbye. Other times, it ends with an SD card and a sarcastic smile. Mine did both. Winning feels different when your life's on fire. You expect a parade, confetti, maybe a choir singing, "We told you so." What you get instead is silence, exhaustion, and a headache that could qualify for workers' comp. That's what my first courtroom victory felt like. A technical win served on a rusted platter. The kind of win where everyone claps, but you still smell smoke. The footage had done its job. Rachel's makeup masterpiece, her grand performance of "Help, I'm married to a monster," collapsed faster than a bad souffle. The judge ordered a pause in proceedings, pending further verification of evidence. Translation: they had to figure out how to politely say, "Oops, our bad," without writing it into law books. But court victories don't feel like movies. There's no dramatic music swelling in the background, no grateful hugs. There's just you, your lawyer, and a bunch of strangers pretending your life is an episode of Law and Order, Midlife Crisis Unit. When the gavel came down that morning, Mason grinned like a cat that had swallowed a whole law library. He whispered, "We did it, Mike. This changes everything." I wanted to believe him, but I'd seen enough courtroom dramas to know the first victory is just a prologue to round two. Rachel didn't say a word. She just sat there, stiff as a wax figure, eyes darting like she was trying to calculate how fast she could dig another trap. Her lawyer, Harper Dawes, a woman whose face had the emotional range of a granite countertop, leaned in to whisper something to her. Probably, "Don't cry. Crying's for losers, and your waterproof mascara can't handle it." The judge dismissed everyone. And just like that, I was free to go. Free. What a joke. I walked out of that courthouse with Mason beside me, and the hallway exploded with noise. Reporters, microphones, flashing lights, like I'd just stepped off a reality TV set. One of them yelled, "Mr. Rowan, do you have a comment?" Another one shouted, "Did you really have proof your wife lied?" A third asked, "How does it feel to clear your name?" How does it feel? I wanted to say, like drinking lukewarm coffee after surviving a car crash. Mason threw his arm around me and muttered, "Say nothing. Smile if you can." So I smiled, the kind of tight, polite smile people given mugshots. It didn't fool anyone. Outside, the air was sharp, the kind that burns your throat and tastes like new beginnings you don't trust yet. The courthouse stairs stretched out in front of me, and I took them slow, one step at a time, like an old man leaving a boxing ring after round 12. My mother was waiting at the bottom, small, fragile, and heartbreakingly hopeful. She'd flown in from Florida, because apparently, when your son's accused of being a domestic terrorist with a mortgage, it makes the news down there too. Michael, she whispered, tears in her eyes. They said you won. Temporarily, I said. Like renting peace. She hugged me tight. The kind of hug that smells like home and worry. I hadn't realized how much I needed it until then. But even hugs can't fix what public humiliation breaks. By the time I checked my phone, it was full. Calls from reporters, voicemails from people I barely remembered, and texts from investors that all said the same polite panic. We need to talk. See, I co-founded Rowan Freight 10 years ago, a small shipping company that turned into a multi-state operation. We moved goods faster than gossip in a small town. But success doesn't mean squat when your name gets dragged through the mud. Business partners see domestic violence trial and stop seeing logistics genius. They see headline risk. That afternoon, I drove back to the office. My car's GPS kept rerouting me because apparently, even technology wanted to help me avoid the disaster ahead. When I walked into the lobby, everyone suddenly remembered how fascinating the floor was. Conversation stopped. The intern dropped her pen twice. Janet, my assistant, looked at me with the kind of pity that's worse than hate. You okay, boss? Define okay, I said. Because if it means still legally human, then sure. She nodded awkwardly. The board wants to meet tomorrow. Of course they did. Nothing says support like a mandatory meeting to discuss your potential replacement. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my rental apartment, the kind of place with carpet that smells like disappointment and old pizza, staring at the ceiling fan while the local news replayed the footage. The anchor said, developments in the Rowan case show potential fabrication of evidence. My name was back on the screen, and for once, it wasn't followed by alleged abuser. But it didn't feel like redemption. It felt like a stay of execution. I poured myself a drink. Cheap bourbon in a mug because I hadn't unpacked glasses yet, and whispered, to survival. It sounded pathetic even to me. My phone buzzed. It was Mason. You watching the news? Yeah, I said. Feels weird seeing my life with commercial breaks. He chuckled softly. Enjoy the win, Mike. You earned it. Sure, I said. It's just, it doesn't feel like winning. Feels like surviving a plane crash and realizing you're stranded in the ocean. Then tread water, he said. Tomorrow's the rescue. Easier said than done. The next morning, I showed up at the office early. The silence was different this time, heavier. My co-founder, Greg Walters, was already there, leaning against the conference table. Greg's the kind of guy who can smell profit and fear in equal measure. He's also the kind who'll smile at you while checking your pulse for weakness. Mike, he said, voice too casual. Hell of a day yesterday. Understatement of the century, I said. He gestured for me to sit. Look, man, I believe you. Everyone saw the video. It's insane. But investors are nervous. They're calling it reputational risk. Reputational risk, I repeated. Funny, they didn't care about risk when I was making them millions. He sighed. They'll come around. Just stay quiet. Let it die down. Stay quiet. I said, raising an eyebrow. I've been quiet for months, Greg. Silence almost cost me my life. I'm done whispering. He didn't argue. He didn't have to. We both knew silence was safer, even if it tasted like surrender. After he left, I sat in my office staring at the wall where Rachel's family portrait used to hang. She'd taken it down before she left, petty symbolism at its finest. In its place was a pale square of clean paint, like the ghost of better days. The press didn't stop. The next day, a reporter cornered me outside the office. Mr. Rowan, any comments on the allegations being disproven? I forced a smile. Yeah, don't believe everything you contour. She blinked, confused. Excuse me. Nothing, I said. Just a bad joke. It became my coping mechanism. Humor, sarcasm, deflection. They say laughter is the best medicine, but in my case, it was the only thing not trying to bill me hourly. Still, I couldn't shake the emptiness. You can clear your name on paper, but in people's heads, You're still guilty until proven newsworthy again. My mother called every night, telling me to stay strong. My son, Josh, barely spoke to me. My daughter, Emma, asked if mommy was still sad. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that her mom's sadness is a weapon? The truth didn't fix that. It didn't fix the business calls that suddenly went unavailable. It didn't fix the friends who ghosted me because being associated with me was too complicated. It didn't fix the way strangers looked at me, curious, judgmental, cautious. Winning didn't give me back my life. It just stopped the bleeding. That weekend, Mason invited me to dinner. He said it'd be good to eat something that isn't bitterness. We went to a steakhouse downtown, the kind where they charge you for the privilege of chewing. Halfway through, he asked, "So what's next?" "Next?" I laughed. "Next I rebuild. Or I vanish. Depends on how long my sanity lasts." He leaned in. "Don't disappear, Mike. The system counts on that. You've got the truth on your side. Use it." I nodded, though I didn't feel brave. I felt tired, like a man who'd climbed a mountain just to realize he was on the wrong one. When I got back to my apartment, there was a note under the door. It was from Rachel's lawyer, hand-delivered. My stomach sank before I even opened it. The headline read, "Motion TO reopen custody hearing." I laughed. Loud, manic, exhausted laughter. Of course, she wasn't done. Of course she'd reload. I sat on the couch, letter in one hand, drink in the other, and whispered, "You should have gone into acting, Rachel. You had the makeup skills for it." That's when I realized something crucial. Rachel wasn't just trying to win custody or money. She wanted control. Control over the narrative, over public opinion, over me. And I wasn't about to let her. The next morning, I called Mason. "She's coming back?" I said. "Of course she is," he replied. "People like Rachel don't stop until the credits roll." "Then let's make sure this movie ends on my terms." He hesitated. "You sure you're ready for another round?" I looked around my half-empty apartment. The boxes still stacked, the life half-lived. "I'm not ready," I said, "but I'm not backing down either." That first courtroom win, the one that made headlines, the one that technically cleared my name, didn't feel like justice. It felt like a ceasefire. And in that silence, I learned something important. Survival isn't the same as freedom. When the truth finally starts working in your favor, you don't celebrate. You prepare. Because if life's taught me anything, it's that every time you think you've hit rock bottom, someone out there's still digging. So yeah, I won. But it tasted like rust, like something old and bitter. And deep down, I knew the fight wasn't over. Not even close. You ever think your life's finally starting to settle, and then the universe decides, nope, let's spice it up with a government agency? Yeah, that was me the morning the CPS call came through. 3 letters that can turn any parent into a panic-sweating wreck. I was in the middle of making breakfast. My son Josh wanted pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. My daughter Emma was arguing that syrup counts as a vegetable, and I was just happy the coffee maker hadn't gone on strike. Life, for the first time in months, felt almost normal. Then the phone rang. "Mr. Rowan?" The voice asked, calm and professional, like someone reading from a manual on how to ruin your day politely. "This is Child Protective Services. We've received a report regarding the safety of your children." Now, there are certain phrases in life that hit you like a freight train. "We need to talk. It's not you. It's me. Your card was declined." But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to child endangerment investigation. My throat went dry. "I'm sorry, what?" The woman continued, still in her calm robot voice. "A report was filed indicating your children may be in an unsafe environment. We'll need to schedule a home visit." My brain short-circuited. Unsafe environment? You mean the one with the Lego mines and snack wrappers? That unsafe environment. She didn't laugh. Government people never laugh. "Sir, I understand this is stressful, but we just need to confirm everything's okay." "Yeah," I said, because that's definitely what it sounds like. She gave me a time, 2 p.m., and hung up before I could finish hyperventilating. I just stood there holding the phone, staring at the skillet like it was supposed to explain what the hell just happened. "Dad," Josh asked, "why do you look like you saw a ghost?" I forced a smile. "Because, buddy, apparently ghosts work in child services now." The truth hit me in slow motion. Rachel had done it again. She'd turned the nuclear launch keys. After losing her courtroom stunt, she'd gone for the next easiest weapon, motherhood. I could practically hear her saying it. "He's unstable, Your Honor." He's dangerous. Think of the children. By 1:59, I'd scrubbed every inch of the house like Martha Stewart under duress. The CPS caseworkers arrived right on time, two of them. One tall guy in a navy sweater and a clipboard, and a woman who looked like she'd seen every excuse in the book and didn't believe a single one. "Mr. Rowan?" she said, flashing her badge like a magician about to ruin my day. "Yep, that's me. And welcome to what I like to call the world's least exciting crime scene." They didn't laugh. Tough crowd. They walked in and immediately started scanning the place like I'd hidden contraband behind the cereal boxes. They checked the fridge, opened cupboards, took notes on their clipboards like they were rating me for an episode of Parenting. The audit. Josh and Emma sat on the couch, looking confused and a little scared. "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" Emma whispered. That question sliced through me like paper on skin. I knelt beside her and said, "No, sweetheart. These people just have to make sure Daddy keeps the house as clean as Grandma's." The woman, Ms. Lewis, knelt too, smiling in that overly gentle way people do when they're trying to look friendly but still think you might bite. "Emma, do you feel safe here with your dad?" Emma nodded. "Yeah. He makes pancakes and lets us stay up on Fridays." "Good," Ms. Lewis said, scribbling something on her clipboard. Josh piped up. "Can I tell you about the fort we built?" The man, Mr. Dunn, smiled faintly. "Maybe later, champ." The inspection went on for what felt like hours. They checked the bedrooms, took photos of the pantry, asked questions that sounded innocent but felt loaded. "Does your dad ever yell? Has he ever scared you? What happens when you get in trouble?" Josh said, "He just makes us clean our rooms." "Ah," Dunn said, writing it down like that was suspicious. When they finally left, Ms. Lewis handed me a card. "We'll follow up within 2 weeks with a report." I took it and smiled through gritted teeth. "Can't wait. Maybe next time we can do brunch and background checks." They didn't smile. Again, the second the door closed, I sank onto the couch. The kids ran to their rooms, blissfully unaware of how close I was to losing my mind. I stared at the ceiling, trying not to scream. Rachel had done it. She'd found another way to weaponize concern. That was her talent, turning empathy into artillery. Later that night, I called Mason. "She called CPS," I said flatly. He sighed like a man who needed a second salary just to deal with my life. "Figures. I'll get ahead of it. They have to investigate, but as long as there's nothing to find." "There isn't," I snapped. "Unless they count mismatched socks as abuse." He chuckled softly. "Mike, I know. But listen, document everything. Who came, what they said, what they looked at. This is all evidence now." I looked at the business card on the table. "Ms. Lewis and Mr. Dunn," I muttered. "They were thorough." "Good," Mason said. "That means they'll see through the bullshit." "Yeah," I said. "Unless Rachel sends them an Oscar reel." The following week was pure anxiety. Every time the phone rang, my heart rate spiked. I cleaned obsessively, cooked gourmet meals for the kids, even organized their closets, which, in hindsight, may have looked suspiciously like bribery. And of course, my dear neighbor, Mrs. Hernandez, decided it was her moment to shine. She was 70, retired, and had the moral compass of a gossip column. The CPS team interviewed her, and she told them she often saw the children alone outside while their father was inside. What she didn't mention was that inside meant me sitting on the porch drinking coffee 5 feet away. When Mason read her statement, I said, "Can we sue her for character defamation and chronic nosiness?" He smirked. Tempting, but no. Then came the nanny. Oh, the nanny. I'd fired her months ago after catching her scrolling TikTok while Emma nearly fell off the trampoline. She claimed she'd witnessed emotional volatility. That's legalese for he told me to put her phone away. It felt like every bad decision I'd ever made had formed a union and decided to strike at once. When the CPS report finally came back, it was 3 pages long and so bureaucratic it could put caffeine to sleep. The summary: no evidence of abuse or neglect found. Case closed. I read it 3 times just to make sure it wasn't sarcasm. Mason called the next morning. "Told you they'd find nothing," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "But Rachel's gonna spin it anyway. Probably tell everyone I bribed them with a Costco membership." He laughed. "Let her. Every lie she tells builds your case stronger. Trust me, this is going to blow back on her eventually." "Eventually," I said, "isn't fast enough." But he was right. I just didn't know it yet. That weekend, Rachel tried to pick up the kids for her custody visit. all smiles and perfume like she wasn't the emotional equivalent of a landmine. I opened the door, arms crossed. CPS says hi, I said. Her smile faltered for a second. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't, I said. Must have been another concerned citizen who knows our address and hates my curtains. She rolled her eyes. Michael, you're paranoid. Maybe if you didn't act so defensive. Defensive? I laughed. You faked bruises, called government agents on me, and tried to take my business. Defensive doesn't begin to cover it. She leaned in close, voice low. You think this is over? I smiled. No, Rachel. I think you just keep losing prettier. She left in a huff, and I stood there, hands shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. It hit me then how dangerous she'd become. She wasn't fighting for love or family or even money anymore. She was fighting for the story. She wanted to be the heroine of a tragedy, and she didn't care how many people she destroyed to sell it. That night, I poured myself another drink, bourbon again, because irony likes consistency, and stared out the window. I thought about the kids asleep upstairs, about the way Emma had hugged me tighter that night, and how Josh had asked if we could watch The Incredibles again. Because to them, life was still simple. Heroes and villains were easy to spot. If only it stayed that way. The CPS ordeal didn't break me. It taught me something crucial. Rachel wasn't fighting fair, and I couldn't keep playing defense. Mason was right. Every false accusation, every manipulative stunt was evidence. I started keeping a log, dates, names, everything. I recorded phone calls, legally, mostly, saved texts, even started using an app that timestamps interactions. If she wanted to wage war in the court of public opinion, I was building a fortress. I remember Mason telling me during one of our late-night calls, Mike, she's throwing grenades. You just keep catching them and handing them back. Yeah, I said, except my hands are starting to burn. He laughed. That's called progress. When the CPS case officially closed, I took the kids out for ice cream. We sat in the park, watching the sunset, Emma's face smeared with chocolate, Josh bragging about finishing his cone first. For a brief moment, I forgot about courts and lawyers and Rachel. It was just us. Then my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Enjoy your victory. It won't last. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. No signature, but I didn't need one. Rachel had gone quiet for a few days. Too quiet. And quiet, I'd learned, was her favorite setup for chaos. I put my phone down, looked at the kids, and smiled anyway. Let's get extra toppings, I said. Because if the bullets were going to keep coming, I might as well enjoy dessert between the shots. If hell had an accounting department, Rachel would have been the CEO. I thought the CPS fiasco was the grand finale of her chaos symphony, but clearly, my ex had more instruments in her orchestra of ruin. The next chapter of her revenge tour arrived in a crisp envelope labeled Request for Financial Disclosure. Now, if you've never had to deal with a financial audit during a divorce, let me translate that. It's basically an IRS colonoscopy administered by people who hate joy. When Mason handed me the envelope, he sighed like a man whose job involved breaking bad news to puppies. She's requesting a full forensic review of Rowan Freight, he said. She wants access to your business accounts, tax returns, and any personal expenditures tied to the company. I blinked. So basically everything? Everything, he confirmed. I leaned back in my chair, rubbed my face, and groaned. She's trying to take the company, isn't she? Not take it, Mason said, just bleed it dry. She's claiming financial concealment and mismanagement. If the court buys it, she can demand up to 50%. 50%. The number hung in the air like a bad smell. I built Rowan Freight from a rented storage unit and 2 borrowed trucks. I ate ramen noodles while negotiating with clients and slept in the damn office during the early years. And now she wanted half, because apparently betrayal comes with a bonus plan. She's also requesting temporary alimony, Mason added carefully. $22,000 a month. I sat up straight. $22,000? Is she feeding the kids or renting NASA? He shrugged. It's a negotiation tactic. We'll fight it. I laughed bitterly. Fight it. Mason, she's fighting dirty. She's not just throwing punches. She's digging for bones. The next few weeks were a blur of legal documents, bank statements, and sleepless nights. A forensic accountant named Gregson showed up at my office, briefcase in hand, expression permanently set to I don't trust you. He looked like he ate spreadsheets for breakfast. Mr. Rowan, he said, sitting across from me. This will be a full review of all business and personal transactions for the last 5 years. Great, I said, forcing a smile. You'll find I'm guilty of nothing but bad coffee habits. He didn't laugh, not even a smirk. These financial people have the sense of humor of a malfunctioning calculator. For days, my office turned into a paper jungle. Gregson asked for receipts, invoices, contracts, tax filings. I half expected him to request baby pictures next. Every time I handed him something, he'd nod solemnly and say, "We'll verify this." Like I'd forged a Target receipt for fun. Meanwhile, Rachel was out there performing her usual martyr routine. She'd post vague status updates online. Some battles are harder than others, but truth always wins red heart. And, of course, her friends would swarm the comments section. "You're so strong. Stay brave. Men can be monsters." It was like watching a cult that worships hashtags. I stopped scrolling. Every time I saw her name, my blood pressure auditioned for Cirque du Soleil. Mason warned me, "Don't engage online. They want you angry." Too late. I was angry, but I was also something worse, tired. The kind of tired you can't fix with coffee or vacation. One day, while Gregson was knee-deep in company ledgers, he asked, "Who's Daniel Reese?" "My business partner," I said cautiously. "Why?" Gregson's eyebrows twitched. "Interesting. There are several expense reimbursements under his name that also appear under your wife's account." My stomach dropped. "What kind of reimbursements?" He turned the laptop toward me. There it was, transaction after transaction. Dinners, hotels, consulting fees. And right there, in neat black font, recipient, Rachel Rowan. Authorized by D. Reese. Son of a... I slammed my hand on the desk. Gregson jumped. "Mr. Rowan, I just record facts," he said quickly. I stood up, pacing. So she's been working with him. My partner. My own damn CFO. I remembered that restaurant video, the one a mutual friend sent me weeks ago. Rachel and Daniel having dinner, leaning in close, laughing. At the time, I'd written it off as a client meeting. God, I was stupid. When I told Mason, he cursed softly. She's using him to build a narrative, collusion, hidden funds, whatever story fits. We'll need to get ahead of it. I slammed my fist on the table. She's not building a narrative, Mason. She's building a damn empire out of my destruction. He looked at me calmly. Then it's time to build yours back. The next court session was a circus. Rachel sat across from me, perfectly put together in a cream blazer and pearls, looking like she'd just stepped out of a Good Housekeeping ad for sociopaths. Harper, her lawyer, stood up and began the show. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "we have reason to believe Mr. Rowan has been concealing assets and manipulating company finances to avoid equitable distribution." She held up a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "We have records of undisclosed transactions and internal transfers lacking documentation." I turned to Mason. "What is she talking about?" He whispered, bullshit wrapped in buzzwords. Don't react. But I did react, internally, because I knew how this looked. In divorce court, perception eats facts for breakfast. The judge looked unimpressed but curious. "Mr. Rowan, do you have any response to these claims?" Mason stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We have a full financial audit in progress, and every transaction will be accounted for. The defense asks for patience as the facts unfold, unlike the fiction presented today." The courtroom murmured. Rachel frowned, just slightly, a crack in her porcelain mask. We left the courthouse under a cloud of camera flashes. I didn't say a word. Mason drove. I just stared out the window, watching my reflection blur against the city lights. "Don't let her see you crack," Mason said quietly. "I'm not cracking," I muttered. "I'm calculating." Because that's the thing about being falsely accused. After the rage burns out, you get precise. Strategic. You stop asking why and start asking how to make it hurt back. That night, I went home to a living room littered with documents. I started connecting dots, dates, signatures, wire transfers. Daniel's name kept popping up like a virus. I texted Mason, "Check into Reese. Something's off." He replied within minutes, "Already on it." 2 days later, Mason called. "You were right. Reese has been moving company money through a personal LLC. Guess whose name appears on the beneficiary list?" I didn't even need to answer. Rachel. That name, that face, that voice pretending to tremble in court. She was behind every thread unraveling my life. I didn't know whether to scream or applaud her criminal creativity. Mason continued, "We can use this, but we have to play it slow. Let them keep digging their hole." Slow wasn't my style. I wanted to storm into her house and read her the bank statements like bedtime stories. But I played along, because I knew this wasn't about proving innocence anymore. It was about reclaiming control. In the meantime, I did what every emotionally damaged businessman does. I threw myself into work. Rowan Freight became my war bunker. Every delivery, every report, every late-night spreadsheet was armor. My employees kept their distance. You could smell scandal on me like cologne. Still, I kept pushing. I had to, because if I stopped, even for a second, the grief and rage would catch up. One night, I found myself sitting alone in the office, staring at an old company photo, me, Rachel, and Daniel at our 5-year anniversary party. I was holding a champagne glass. Rachel was leaning on me, smiling. Daniel had his hand on my shoulder. I stared at that hand for a long time, then crumpled the photo and threw it in the trash. I muttered, "Never again." The next day, Mason called again. "We've got a court date for the audit hearing. Bring everything. This is where we turn it around." I laughed dryly. "You make it sound like a sports game." He chuckled. "It kind of is. And right now, we're down by 20. But trust me, we've got better players." At the hearing, Harper strutted in like she'd already won. Rachel followed, feigning frailty, a white blouse, minimal makeup, the soft, trembling hands of a woman wronged. I could practically hear the theme music she'd picked for herself. Mason started his defense, walking the jury through the evidence. Receipts, bank records, time-stamped transfers. "Every transaction is legitimate," he said. "And what's more, several of the so-called concealed accounts were established by Ms. Rowan and Mr. Reese for the purpose of embezzlement." Harper objected, "Of course. Speculation." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof, Mr. Colby?" Mason smiled, that wolfish grin I'd come to love. "Yes, Your Honor. Exhibit C." He clicked a button, and up on the screen appeared bank logs, clear as daylight, showing money wired from Rowan Freight into accounts owned by Reese Holdings, LLC. The listed secondary beneficiary, Rachel Rowan. The courtroom gasped. It was déjà vu, another bombshell, another Rachel silence. She sat frozen, jaw tight, eyes darting to her lawyer like, "Fix it." But Harper couldn't fix it. She could only sputter. This doesn't prove intent." Mason stepped forward. "Intent? Then maybe Exhibit D will help." He pulled out a printed email chain between Reese and Rachel discussing fund allocation and ensuring Mike doesn't find out. The judge read it quietly, then looked at Rachel. "Ms. Rowan, do you care to explain this?" Rachel's face went pale. Harper placed a hand on her arm, whispering something urgent, but it was too late. The damage was done. I didn't smile. Not yet. But I finally exhaled. When the gavel finally came down that day, the judge ordered a hold on all disputed assets until further review. Rachel's claws loosened, not gone, but slipping. Outside, Mason clapped me on the back. "Told you, better players." I smirked. "Yeah. But I'm still getting tired of the game." He nodded. "Then let's make sure the next round ends it for good." That night, I went home, poured myself one last drink, and opened my laptop. I wasn't just a defendant anymore. I was a man on offense. Rachel had used every trick she had. Lies, pity, manipulation. Now it was my turn to play smarter. Because if she wanted a war built on paperwork, fine. I had an army of proof and a lawyer who loved fire. And I was finally ready to light the match. You ever walk into a courtroom and feel like you're walking into your own funeral rehearsal? That's what day one of the trial of the century, as one overexcited reporter called it, felt like. My name was plastered everywhere. Rowan versus Rowan. Freight fortune fraud? It was like the tabloids had formed a jazz band, and I was their favorite solo. Even the bailiff looked at me like he'd already Googled my Wikipedia page. The courtroom was packed. Family law groupies, reporters, distant relatives who suddenly remembered my number, and that one guy who always seems to attend trials for the snacks. The air reeked of perfume, paper, and tension. At the front sat the judge, the same one from our earlier hearings, a man whose resting face looked like, "Don't waste my time," had been tattooed into his soul. Mason and I took our seats at the defense table. He looked sharp, calm, every inch the unflappable attorney. Me? I looked like someone who'd aged 5 years and 5 months. Rachel walked in moments later, escorted by her legal pit bull, Harper Dawes. She wore all black this time. Dramatic, sleek, widowcore chic. The only thing missing was a veil and a tragic piano soundtrack. She didn't look at me, not once. But her posture said everything. She still thought she could win this. The clerk called the case. Harper stood, her tone sweet but predatory. Your Honor, this case is not about bitterness. It's about accountability. Mr. Rowan manipulated finances, hid assets, and emotionally terrorized my client for years. There it was, terrorized. A word that makes juries shift in their seats and Google how to spot an abuser. I didn't even flinch. Mason told me not to react no matter what she said. Your calm is your credibility, he'd whispered before court. So, I sat there, hands folded, face neutral, while inside my mind screamed, what the hell is she talking about? Rachel took the stand on day 2. She started crying before she even reached the microphone. It wasn't new. She had those tears on a retainer plan. He controlled everything, she said between delicate sobs. I couldn't even buy groceries without asking. Now, for context, Rachel's idea of groceries once included $200 bottles of wine, imported cheese, and flowers for herself, because aesthetics are self-care. But I let her spin her fantasy. The jury nodded sympathetically. Half of them looked like they wanted to adopt her on the spot. Mason leaned in and whispered, they're falling for it. I can see that, I muttered, biting back sarcasm. Should I pass around the tissues or just my wallet? He smirked. Wait for cross. Then came the audio recording. Harper pressed play like she'd been waiting all week for this moment. A grainy sound filled the room. My voice, clipped and rearranged, saying, dig until she breaks. The room froze. My heart stopped. It sounded exactly like me. Angry, cold, cruel. The jury turned toward me, faces shifting from sympathy to horror in real time. Even Mason looked momentarily thrown off. Your Honor, Harper said, voice syrup sweet. This recording was provided by a former employee. It clearly shows Mr. Rowan's intent to destroy my client emotionally and financially. Mason shot to his feet. Objection. Unauthenticated, heavily edited. The judge held up a hand. Overruled, for now. Continue. I sat there, staring at the screen, realizing what they'd done. They'd taken multiple clips from business meetings, me talking about competitors, not my wife, and sliced them together into a masterpiece of slander. It was audio Frankenstein. Rachel sniffled theatrically. He said that to my face once. I remember shaking. Oh, she remembered shaking all right. Probably from laughter after faking it on her MacBook. When cross-examination came, Mason went surgical. Calm, precise, unrelenting. Mrs. Rowan, you claim these recordings are authentic? Yes, she said softly. And where exactly did you get them? She blinked. From my husband's office. I found them. Found them? Mason raised an eyebrow. In your husband's locked, private office? Yes. So you broke in? Answer the question. Her lip trembled. Yes. The jury's head snapped up. Mason smiled faintly. Interesting. So you illegally obtained the recordings that you now claim prove your case. Harper objected. The judge overruled. Mason paced slowly. Mrs. Rowan, you also allege you felt unsafe during your marriage. Can you explain this photo? He handed her Exhibit 27, a picture of Rachel and me at a company gala. Her hand on my chest, smiling, kissing my cheek. The date stamp? 2 weeks before her first abuse allegation. Rachel hesitated. That was before things got bad. Of course, Mason said, nodding like a man humoring a child. And this? He pulled up another image. Rachel on vacation in Cabo, 2 months after she'd filed the restraining order. Her face went pale. That was work. Work, Mason repeated, glancing at the jury. On a beach. With margaritas. While allegedly fearing for your life. The jury chuckled. The judge even smirked. I nearly stood and clapped. But Rachel wasn't done. She adjusted her tone, all wounded dignity. He's lying. He's manipulating the narrative. That's what he does. Mason didn't flinch. Ma'am, you've used that word a lot, manipulation. Would you call secretly filming yourself applying fake bruises manipulation? The silence that followed could have cured hiccups. The jurors looked like someone had just spoiled the end of a mystery movie. I don't know what you mean, she stammered. Oh, I think you do, Mason said. And suddenly the courtroom screen lit up with that footage. The video of her stippling makeup onto her cheek. Gasps erupted again. One juror muttered, "Oh, damn." Rachel's mask shattered. Harper tried to stand, but even the judge cut her off. "Sit down, Ms. Dawes." The hearing recessed for lunch, but the damage was irreversible. The media outside went nuclear. "Rachel Rowan's lies exposed again," one headline screamed. But just when I thought it was over, Harper regrouped. After lunch, she pulled out another trick, a whistleblower affidavit. Some mysterious ex-employee claimed I'd funneled money into offshore trusts under a relative's name. It was beautifully evil, specific enough to sound credible, vague enough to be impossible to immediately disprove. Mason's jaw tightened. "We weren't informed of this evidence." "New testimony," Harper said smugly. The judge allowed it. Of course he did. Because in family court, rules bend like yoga instructors. The witness, a middle-aged man named Richard Voss, took the stand. I didn't recognize him, but apparently, he'd worked briefly in our logistics department. He told a story so dramatic it should have come with a movie score. "Mr. Rowan ordered me to move funds offshore. He said, and I quote, 'No one's taking what's mine.'" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how bad it was. I've said a lot of things in life, most of them sarcastic, but that? Please. Even my rage has better grammar. Mason cross-examined him like a cat playing with a mouse. "Mr. Voss, how long did you work for Rowan Freight?" 6 months. "And were you fired for falsifying reports?" Richard hesitated. It was a misunderstanding." "Of course," Mason said, smiling. "And did you receive any compensation from Ms. Rowan or her associates for your testimony?" "I was reimbursed for travel." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Travel? To which exotic destination?" "The courthouse." The courtroom laughed. Even I grinned. Still, the damage was done. The jurors looked torn. The word offshore echoed like poison. When the day ended, Mason said, "They're trying to drown us in half-truths. Don't bite." "Bite," I said, exhausted. "Mason, I'm practically chewing concrete to stay calm." We walked out into a storm of microphones and flashing cameras. Someone yelled, "Michael, did you hide assets?" Another screamed, "Do you still love her?" I looked straight at them and said, "Love her? I don't even like her accountant." The clip went viral by evening. At least my sarcasm had good PR. That night, back in my rented apartment, I replayed everything in my head. The fake audio, the lies, the tears, the jurors' faces. It felt like no matter what I did, the truth couldn't shout loud enough. Rachel had mastered emotional theater, and I was stuck performing as the stoic villain. Mason called around 11 p.m. "We're not done yet," he said. "We found something." "What?" "That affidavit? The metadata's wrong. It was created 3 days ago on Harper Dawes' personal laptop." I sat up straight. "You're kidding." "I never kid about fraud," he said. "We're pulling IP logs. If this pans out, it's not just perjury, it's conspiracy." For the first time that week, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of grin that happens when a cornered man finds a weapon. "Good," I said, "because I'm done defending myself. It's time we show them what happens when you frame the wrong guy." Mason chuckled. "Now you're thinking like a lawyer." "More like a survivor," I said. I hung up, stared at the ceiling, and let out a long breath. The trial wasn't over. The war wasn't won. But for the first time, the balance was shifting. The odds, the ones stacked so high they looked like skyscrapers, had started to crumble. And I swore, right then and there, when the truth finally tore through, it wouldn't just clear my name. It would burn their lies so clean the smell would linger for years. There's a moment, right before a verdict is read, when the whole world holds its breath. The judge looks down at the papers. The jurors stare ahead like statues, and even the clock stops ticking out of respect for the chaos about to unfold. For me, that moment felt like waiting for the universe to decide whether I got to be a man again or a meme. The courtroom was packed tighter than a Black Friday line outside Best Buy. Everyone wanted to witness the grand finale of the Rowan versus Rowan saga. You could feel the collective excitement of people who loved tragedy as long as it wasn't theirs. The reporters were practically vibrating. One even whispered, "He's trending again," like it was an Olympic achievement. Rachel sat across from me in her signature weaponized elegance. Hair tied back, black dress, no jewelry except her wedding ring, which she still wore because symbolism is her love language. Her expression was calm, the kind of calm that comes when someone's convinced they've already won. Beside her, Harper Dawes sat like an executioner waiting for the go signal. Mason leaned toward me. Whatever happens, we appeal. Don't react. Don't react. I whispered. Mason, that's like telling someone not to flinch during open-heart surgery. He gave me a small, reassuring smile. You've done harder things. Like marrying her. Before I could respond, the judge called for order. The clerk handed over the verdict forms. The sound of paper shuffling felt louder than thunder. My palms were slick. My jaw hurt from clenching. I glanced at Rachel. She didn't even look my way, just stared ahead, breathing slowly like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. On the matter of financial fraud, the foreman read, "We find the defendant liable." It was like the air got sucked out of the room. Liable. The word hit like a hammer. I didn't even hear the rest of the sentence. My brain just kept looping that one word like a broken record. The next part followed fast, like bullets. On concealment of assets, liable. On custody of minor children, awarded to the plaintiff. I felt my heart cave in on itself. Custody. The word echoed through me, sharp and final. Rachel didn't flinch. She simply tilted her chin up a little higher, like a queen accepting her crown. The judge spoke next. Mr. Rowan, this court finds sufficient evidence of deceptive financial practices and failure to provide full disclosure. 60% of Rowan freight will be transferred to Ms. Rowan pending appeal. 60%. She'd taken my life's work and turned it into her victory confetti. The gavel came down with a sound that might as well have been the closing of a coffin. Mason put a hand on my shoulder, steady, silent, professional. I didn't move. I couldn't. Reporters exploded into motion the second court adjourned. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. Mr. Rowan, do you plan to appeal? Did you hide assets? How do you feel about losing custody? How do I feel? Like someone reached into my chest, pulled out my lungs, and told me to give a statement. That's how I felt. Mason shielded me as we walked out, muttering, "Keep walking." Outside, the media swarm grew. I caught a glimpse of Rachel smiling faintly for the cameras. Just a small, practiced smile, the kind you give when you know public opinion is your favorite child. I wanted to yell. I wanted to tell the world about her lies, her forged recordings, her fake bruises. But Mason's words echoed in my head, "Don't react." So I didn't. I just got in the car, shut the door, and sat there while the noise faded into glass-muted silence. Mason sighed, removing his glasses. "We'll file an appeal. We'll prove the affidavit was falsified, the accounting fabricated. It's not over." I laughed, a low, broken sound. "Feels pretty over. Mike," he said gently. "It's only over when you stop fighting." I stared out the window, watching photographers chase Rachel's car like paparazzi chasing a royal scandal. She just won everything. He shook his head. She won the spotlight. That's not the same thing. That night, I went home to an apartment that suddenly felt too quiet, too clean, too temporary. I poured whiskey into a mug because I couldn't find a glass that didn't remind me of her. My phone buzzed nonstop. Calls, messages, news alerts. Businessman Michael Rowan found liable in shocking trial. Wife of freight CEO wins custody battle amid financial scandal. It was all noise. Background static. The kind that crawls under your skin until you want to smash the phone just to hear silence again. At some point, I stopped checking the time. I just sat there, staring at the wall, thinking about my kids. About how Rachel would probably tell them I chose work over family. About how they believe her, because kids always believe the person who cries louder. When I finally slept, it was shallow, restless. I dreamed of courtroom lights and Rachel's fake tears. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, heart hammering like I'd run a marathon through hell. The next morning, Mason called early. "You ready to fight?" I didn't answer right away. "You ever get tired of being right?" "Only when the wrong people win," he said. He told me he'd found inconsistencies in the bank logs presented at trial. Rachel and Reese manipulated timestamps. If we can prove that, the verdict can be overturned. That word, overturned, felt like oxygen. But before I could even feel hope, reality reminded me it still had bills to collect. By noon, my email inbox was a graveyard of canceled contracts. Clients were reevaluating their business relationships. Translation: no one wants to work with the guy who just lost a high-profile trial. Greg Walters, my co-founder, called. "Mike, I'm sorry, man. The board's nervous. They want to temporarily suspend your management role until this clears up." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "So I built the company. paid everyone's salaries, and now I get a timeout. It's not personal, Greg said weakly. It's entirely personal, I snapped. Then, quieter. But I get it. You're protecting the brand. I hung up before he could reply. That evening, I tried calling my kids. Rachel didn't answer. She texted instead. They're asleep. Let's keep communication through lawyers. My hands shook as I typed back. They're my children, not legal exhibits. No reply. I stared at my reflection in the window. A man hollowed out by lies, framed by city lights that didn't care who won. For the next few days, the world moved on while I stood still. Rachel did interviews, soft focus, sympathetic lighting, the full redemption arc. It's been hard, she told one host, blinking perfectly timed tears. But I'm just focused on healing and being the best mom I can be. The audience clapped. Somewhere, a producer smiled. Somewhere, a sponsor wired her another appearance fee. And me? I became the villain who got what he deserved. But grief has a funny way of evolving. After the numbness wears off, it turns into something else, something colder, sharper. I wasn't angry anymore. I was motivated. I started gathering everything Mason had ever mentioned. The fake audio metadata, the fraudulent bank trails, the Reese LLC shell accounts. I printed them, highlighted them, laid them out across my dining table like a war map. If Rachel wanted to rewrite the narrative, fine. I'd write the sequel. I made calls to old friends in tech, to private investigators, to anyone who owed me a favor. One of them, Alex Monroe, a cyber forensics consultant, laughed when I told him the story. Dude, that's not a marriage. That's organized crime with wedding vows. He offered to help. Send me everything. I'll find the thread she missed. Careful, I said. She bites. He chuckled. So do I. Over the next few weeks, we worked quietly. Mason handled the legal appeal. Alex and his team handled the data audit. I stayed out of sight, letting the world believe I was licking my wounds. It made the comeback sweeter. Still, the emotional hangover was brutal. My mother called every few days, her voice gentle but weighted. Michael, sweetheart, you can rebuild. You always do. I don't want to rebuild, I told her once. I want to make sure she never gets to do this to anyone else. She sighed softly. Revenge doesn't heal, honey. Neither does losing everything to a liar. The silence on the line said she didn't have a counterargument. Weeks passed. The tabloids found new scandals to feed on. Rachel's spotlight dimmed slightly, though she still popped up on social media with captions like, New Beginnings Cherry Blossom, probably typed from the office I once owned. But then, one night, Alex called. You'll want to see this, he said. He sent over a file, screenshots of encrypted messages between Rachel and Daniel Reese. In them, they discussed moving funds, fixing statements, and keeping Mike too busy fighting to notice. The timestamps matched perfectly with the weeks leading up to the trial. I just sat there, staring at the screen, jaw tight. Every emotion I'd been suppressing came roaring back. Rage, vindication, disgust. This is it, I whispered. This, Alex said, is how you burn her kingdom down. The next morning, Mason reviewed the evidence. His grin returned. This isn't just grounds for appeal. This is grounds for prosecution. I leaned back, finally feeling something I hadn't felt in months, control. The verdict may have declared me guilty. The world may have believed her. But the truth? It was finally stretching its arms, waking up from the coma she'd put it in. And when it got out of bed, I swore it was going to run wild. The bankruptcy of my reputation wasn't the end, it was the receipt. Every lie Rachel cashed in would soon bounce. And I'd be there, front row, when the bill came due. Rock bottom doesn't announce itself with a crash. It sneaks up, sets up a folding chair, and asks how long you plan on staying. Mine came with cold coffee, unpaid invoices, and my name trending under fraud. I'd lost my company, my reputation, and my kids. The internet had turned me into a cautionary meme. When gaslighting backfires, the Michael Rowan story. It was poetic, if poetry were written in garbage fonts. So, I did the only logical thing left, I disappeared. I didn't move states or grow a beard, though both were tempting. I just went silent. No social media, no press statements, no lawyer interviews. Rachel thrived on attention, and silence is kryptonite to narcissists. Let her shout into the void. I'd become the void. The first week of exile was ugly. I couldn't go to the grocery store without someone whispering, One barista refused my credit card on moral grounds. Even my barber texted, "Hey, man, maybe lay low for a while. Don't want TMZ outside the shop." So I laid low. For a long time. That's when Mason called me one night. "Mike, I know you're off the grid, but I've got something," he said. "Unless it's the lottery numbers, I'm not interested." He chuckled. "Better. A way to get your life back. I've been talking to a few contacts. We can rebuild your case from the ground up, but we'll need help." "Help?" He grinned through the phone. "I'm talking specialists. The kind who make lies cry." Enter Alex Monroe, digital forensics savant and caffeine addict. The man spoke fluent binary and probably dreamt in Excel sheets. When we met at a dingy diner, he didn't even say hello. He just slid me a folder and said, "I've seen worse." Not much, but worse. Inside were screenshots, metadata reports, timestamps, and transaction trails Rachel had conveniently forgotten existed. "Your wife's been sloppy," Alex said between sips of burnt coffee. Her phone backed up to a shared cloud account. She never turned off auto-sync. "Please tell me that means what I think it means." He smirked. "It means she uploaded her own crimes to the internet." I love amateurs. I didn't know whether to laugh or propose to him. Next came Nina Patel, a PR strategist Mason called a shark in heels. She had a reputation for taking down billionaires, CEOs, and once, a televangelist who tried to ban her client's commercial. Nina was the opposite of Rachel. Calm, controlled, lethal without ever raising her voice. She met me in her glass office downtown. "Michael," she said, shaking my hand, "you've been framed as a villain in a story that was never yours. My job is to rewrite the script." I raised an eyebrow. "You think you can fix public opinion?" She smiled. "I don't fix it. I redirect it. People love two things, a scandal and a comeback. You've already nailed the first one." Her plan was simple. Vanish, gather evidence, then reemerge not as a victim, but as a revelation. "We'll make her look like what she is," Nina said. "A liar with better lighting." The final addition to my unlikely dream team was Elliot Shaw, ex-FBI analyst turned corporate investigator. His handshake felt like a background check. He'd spent 20 years tracking money through digital mazes. "You want proof of fraud?" he said. "I'll make her bank accounts sing." In less than a month, my silent comeback squad was assembled. Alex, tech; Nina, media; Elliot, money; and Mason, law. If Ocean's 11 had a divorce court edition, we were it, minus the tuxedos. Alex went first. He combed through Rachel's emails, cloud backups, and message history. Within days, he found enough red flags to decorate a parade. "Here's a fun one," he said one morning, grinning. "She transferred $80,000 from your joint account into her sister's charity. The same day, she filed the restraining order." "Her sister's charity?" "Yeah," he said, scrolling. "Except the charity doesn't exist. At least, not legally." Elliot confirmed it. The charity was a shell company under Rachel's maiden name. It funneled money into 2 offshore accounts tied to a corporate trust registered in Belize. The name on the trust? V. Lawton. "Victor," I muttered. "The lawyer she was calling." Elliot nodded. "And it gets better. Some of those funds trace back to your own company, the same missing assets she accused you of hiding." My jaw tightened. "She stole from me and then accused me of theft?" Nina looked up from her notes. Classic projection. Also a PR goldmine. We didn't just have breadcrumbs. We had a whole bakery. Alex kept digging. He unearthed voice memos Rachel had deleted but not permanently erased. One where she told her sister, "Once this verdict lands, we're done. He'll be bankrupt and I'll be untouchable." Another where she laughed about how the crying thing always works on juries. Meanwhile, Elliot's forensic report read like an FBI thriller. "Here," he said, pointing to a flowchart that looked like a spider web on caffeine. Money moved from Reese Holdings LLC into 4 personal accounts tied to Rachel's cousin, her sister, and Harper Dawes Private Trust. Guess what? All of them got deposits within 48 hours of the verdict. Mason leaned back, whistling low. "Kickbacks." She paid for a guilty verdict. We stared at each other, a mix of disbelief and grim satisfaction. This wasn't just perjury or fraud. It was criminal conspiracy. That's when I realized the scope of it all. Rachel hadn't just tried to destroy me. She'd built a machine to do it. And now, piece by piece, we were dismantling it. Weeks passed in quiet efficiency. No leaks, no press, No drama. I'd show up at Alex's cluttered apartment every morning, coffee in hand, ready to sift through evidence. Nina coordinated timing, coaching me on public reentry. We'll go nuclear, she said, but on our schedule. Every night, I'd sit at my kitchen table, staring at pictures of my kids. Emma with her missing front tooth. Josh in his soccer uniform, mid-kick. I'd whisper, just a little longer, guys. Daddy's coming back. One night, Nina called. We've got a window, she said. Rachel's receiving an award next month. National Women of Resilience Gala. Perfect stage. Cameras, press, live broadcast. I nearly choked on my coffee. You're saying? Yes, she interrupted. We expose her there. Publicly. Gracefully. Mercilessly. I laughed, a dark, cathartic sound. You're good at this. Reputation warfare is my cardio, she said. The team set everything in motion. Alex and Elliot synchronized evidence packages. Mason prepped legal motions in advance. Nina crafted the narrative, a slow, deliberate reveal designed to blindside her. When we hit, she said, we won't just clear your name. We'll erase hers. But before the storm came calm, deceptive, heavy calm. I walked through the city that week like a ghost. People no longer stared. The tabloids had moved on. I wasn't the villain anymore. I was irrelevant. And honestly, irrelevance is the most powerful disguise there is. By the time the galley approached, every detail was ready. Nina had arranged a donor guest list, complete with my fake alias. Michael Rowe, logistics philanthropist. Alex handled the tech. One button, he said, handing me a small remote. Press it during her speech. The screens will switch to the video compilation. You sure this'll work? Mike, he said, smirking. I once hacked a senator's campaign server with a Fitbit. I got this. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying everything in my head. The courtrooms, the humiliation, Rachel's tears, my kids' confused faces. I wasn't nervous about exposure. I was terrified of how much I wanted it. The night of the gala, I put on my only tux, borrowed from Mason, and walked into the ballroom under a different name. The chandeliers sparkled, champagne flowed, and every guest looked like they practiced empathy for sport. At the center of it all, Rachel shone, flawless in silver, microphone in hand, voice trembling as she said, "This award isn't about me. It's about every woman who's ever survived." I gripped the remote in my pocket, waiting for Nina's nod from across the room. This, I thought, is how the truth returns. But not with rage, not with shouting, with proof. Because I'd learned something in all the wreckage. Revenge isn't loud. It's patient. It's clean. It waits until the liar believes they've won. Then it whispers, checkmate. The night was only beginning, but I could already feel it, the tide turning quietly, inevitably, like justice in a tuxedo. And when it hit, I'd be ready. The night of the gala smelled like money and moral superiority, two things Rachel collected like stamps. The Women of Resilience event was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a place so pretentious it probably charged the chandelier's rent. Everyone there glistened. Sequins, champagne, camera flashes, fake smiles polished brighter than the marble floors. And right in the middle of it all stood my ex-wife, haloed by flashbulbs and hypocrisy, ready to accept an award for courage under fire. I walked in unnoticed, thanks to my new alias, Michael Rowe, a last-minute philanthropic donor. Nina Patel had pulled strings to get me on the guest list, and Alex Monroe, my hacker-turned-hacker with a tux, had handled the technical infiltration. I wasn't there to drink. I wasn't even there to confront her. I was there to end the movie she'd been starring in for years. Rachel looked like a silver dagger that night, sharp, beautiful, and dangerous. Her hair was swept back, her smile effortless. Every reporter hovered near her table like moths around a morally bankrupt flame. "You've been through so much," one journalist gushed. Rachel tilted her head, practiced sympathy gleaming in her eyes. "Yes," she said softly, "but pain builds character." I almost choked on my water. Pain built her character the same way Photoshop builds abs. Mason was somewhere backstage, disguised as legal counsel for the event, because apparently we were now living in a spy movie. Nina, dressed like she owned the place, sat near the front, subtly signaling to Alex in the tech booth. Everything was ready. All I had to do was press one button, the remote in my pocket, and the truth would flood every screen in that ballroom. Rachel took the stage, applause echoing like thunder. She began her speech. When I was at my lowest, when I was misunderstood and vilified, I never gave up. I stood tall for my children, for women everywhere who faced injustice. Oh, the irony. She was preaching resilience using a story she stole from me. Every sentence was a lie wrapped in designer sincerity. The crowd clapped at all the right places, like they'd rehearsed empathy. Then Nina gave the signal, a small nod, barely noticeable. My thumb pressed the button. For a second, nothing happened. Then the lights dimmed, and the massive screens behind Rachel flickered. Her PowerPoint of staged tears vanished, replaced by a black background and a single line of text. The truth matters. Gasps rippled through the audience. Rachel froze. Harper, sitting near the front, stood up, her face draining of color. Then the first clip played. It was a recording, Rachel's voice, calm and smug. Once this verdict lands, we're done. He'll be bankrupt, and I'll be untouchable. Her face dropped. She turned toward the booth, hissing something into her mic too late. The next clip rolled. Text messages between her and Daniel Reese. Move the funds before Mason notices. Keep Mike distracted. I'll handle Harper. The audience murmured. Phones came out. Recording started. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, is this real?" Then came the video, the piece de resistance. Rachel laughing over champagne, bragging to her sister. They all bought it. The crying thing always works. Even the judge. Silence. Pure, perfect silence. Rachel's image filled the screens one last time, smiling wickedly, saying, "After this, I'll finally be free." The screen faded to black. The room erupted, not applause this time, but chaos. Reporters shouted. Cameras flashed. The audience didn't know whether to leave, cry, or order more champagne. Security scrambled. The host rushed to the mic, stammering, We seem to be experiencing technical." Rachel grabbed the microphone, her composure fracturing. "This is slander. Lies. He did this," she shouted, pointing directly at me. Every head turned. For the first time in months, I didn't look away. I stood up slowly, calm as gravity. "Actually," I said, loud enough for the microphones to catch, "those are your words, Rachel. You made your own documentary." The ballroom went nuclear. Harper tried to drag Rachel off stage, but Rachel shoved her away. "He hacked me. He's dangerous," she screamed. Mason stepped forward, badge out. "Ma'am, you might want to stop talking. The district attorney's office is already on their way." Rachel froze mid-scream. You could see the exact moment realization hit, that the cameras, the public, the whole glittering empire she built out of lies were turning on her. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Wasn't she the fake bruise lady?" Another whispered, "Guess resilience comes with receipts." I didn't stay for the end. I walked out through the side door, the noise fading behind me. Nina caught up, grinning like a cat that just closed a deal. "Flawless execution," she said. Alex joined us, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Told you it'd work." Mason's voice came through my earpiece. DA confirmed. "Investigators are en route to her house tonight. They have everything. Everything. The recordings, the fake charities, the bank transfers." Outside, the night air hit me like clarity. For the first time in forever, breathing didn't feel like a chore. I could finally exist without defending my name every 5 minutes. Reporters spilled out behind me, yelling questions. "Mr. Rowan, was that your doing? Do you plan to press charges? Is it true she embezzled company funds?" I stopped, looked at them, and smiled. A real one this time. "No comment," I said, "but maybe check tomorrow's headlines." I got into the waiting car. The city lights blurred past the window as Mason called again. "She's finished, Mike. Fraud, perjury, conspiracy. They'll bury her in paperwork before she even sees a jail cell." I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just whispered, "Good." Because that night wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. About taking back the truth she'd stolen and setting it free in front of the whole damn world. By morning, every news outlet had the footage. The same channels that once called me a monster now called me vindicated. Rachel's lawyer resigned publicly. The foundation revoked her award and issued a statement of deep regret. Her accounts were frozen. Her reputation, gone. And for once, silence worked in my favor. The next text I got was from an unknown number. It was short. "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long minute, then deleted it. Some apologies arrived too late to matter. That night, I poured one last drink, raised it to no one in particular, and said softly, "To resilience, the real kind." Rachel wanted to build her legacy on my destruction. Instead, she built my redemption. And I didn't even have to raise my voice to make it happen. The courtroom felt different this time. Lighter, like the air had finally been scrubbed clean. The judge's gavel came down with words I'd been starving to hear. "Mr. Rowan, you are fully exonerated." That was it. No confetti, no music, just quiet justice. Rachel sat across the room, pale, cornered, the empire of lies crumbling around her. When it ended, I walked outside into sunlight that actually felt like it belonged to me again. Mason shook my hand. Alex and Nina grinned like proud conspirators, and somewhere deep inside, I finally unclenched. My kids ran up, Emma first, then Josh, laughing, shouting, "Daddy, it's over." I held them tight, breathing in something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Rachel lost her freedom. I regained my life. But scars don't fade, they just stop bleeding. As I drove home, I caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled. "Justice," I whispered, "looks good on me."